Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Most people don't understand how isolated US 95 gets after midnight, especially that stretch between Tonopah and Beatty, where the desert swallows everything except the asphalt ribbon cutting through it. I'd been hauling freight across Nevada for about 9 years by that point, and I thought I'd seen every kind of weather, every kind of road condition, every kind of trouble a driver could run into. That particular night in late September proved me wrong on all counts. The name's Holly Briscoe, and I run a 19 Kenworth W900 pulling dry van loads mostly, nothing fancy, but she's paid for and she runs clean. That week, I'd picked up a load of industrial ceramics out of Reno, heading down to a warehouse outside Las Vegas. Dispatch had pushed the delivery window back twice already due to receiving dock problems on their end, which meant I was running 2 days behind schedule and getting pressure from both sides. The cargo itself wasn't particularly valuable, just heavy, about 42,000 pounds of the stuff, but the shipper had some clause about temperature-controlled delivery timing that made everything complicated. By the time I actually got rolling south on 95, it was already past 10 p.m., and the weather reports were calling for possible dust storms moving in from the west. I'd fueled up at the Flying J in Tonopah around 10:30, grabbed terrible coffee and a sandwich that had probably been sitting under heat lamps since the afternoon shift. The kid working the counter, couldn't have been more than 19, warned me about the wind kicking up on the southern stretches. Said a couple of drivers had already turned back, decided to wait it out until morning. But I'd driven through worse, or at least I thought I had, and I needed to make up time. The fuel receipt showed 10:47 p.m. when I pulled back onto 95, and I remember thinking I could push through to Beatty, maybe grab a few hours of sleep at the truck stop there before the final leg into Vegas. The first 30 miles were fine. Standard high desert driving with sagebrush and distant mountains barely visible under a quarter moon. My CB was quiet except for occasional static bursts, and I had the radio tuned to some classic country station out of Tonopah that kept fading in and out. The temperature had dropped to maybe 55 degrees, cold enough that I had the heat on low, and the wind was starting to gust hard enough to push the trailer slightly when it hit from the west. I kept both hands on the wheel, staying right around 65, watching for wildlife because this stretch was notorious for wild burros wandering onto the road after dark. Around mile marker 78, maybe 40 minutes south of Tonopah, the dust started rolling in for real. It wasn't the kind that builds gradually. It hit like a wall, visibility dropping from clear desert night to maybe 30 feet in the space of a few seconds. I immediately dropped my speed to 40, flipped on the hazards, and tightened my grip on the wheel. The wind was hitting the trailer broadside now, strong enough that I could feel the whole rig wanting to drift into the oncoming lane. There was no traffic, hadn't seen another vehicle in probably 20 miles, which was both a relief and unsettling at the same time. That's when I saw the first set of lights ahead. Not headlights exactly, but the red glow of taillights and clearance markers. Another semi parked on the shoulder with hazards flashing. My initial thought was breakdown, or maybe another driver waiting out the dust storm, which would have been the smart play. As I got closer, maybe 200 yards out, I could make out the shape of a Peterbilt conventional. Looked like a 389 model, dark-colored, pulling a standard 53-foot dry van. The truck was angled slightly, nose pointing toward the highway like it had pulled off in a hurry. I started to ease toward the left lane to give them room, standard courtesy, when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There were 2 more trucks parked behind the first one, also with hazards on, also angled the same way. 3 semis in a row, all stopped on the shoulder of one of the loneliest highways in Nevada during a dust storm. That wasn't normal trucker behavior. When you stop for weather, you spread out, give each other space. You don't bunch up like that unless you're coordinating something. I grabbed my CB mic, switching to channel 19. "Southbound trucks at mile 78, this is a northbound Kenworth. You guys need assistance?" Nothing but static. I tried channel 9, the emergency frequency. Same result. But I could see my radio was working fine because the power light was on and the squelch was set right. They either weren't monitoring or weren't responding, and both possibilities bothered me. As I drew even with the first truck, maybe 50 feet of separation, I got a better look at the setup. All three rigs were identical. Same make and model Peterbilts, same dark paint that looked black, or maybe deep blue in my headlights, same style of trailers. No company logos visible. No DOT numbers that I could make out through the dust. Nothing identifying at all. The cabs were dark, no interior lights, but I could see silhouettes of drivers still sitting behind the wheels. That's when the first truck's engine fired up. I heard it even over my own diesel in the wind, that distinctive Packard engine note. Then the second truck started. Then the third. All within maybe 5 seconds of each other, perfectly synchronized like they'd been waiting for a signal. My speedometer was showing 42, and I kept it steady, not accelerating yet, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lead truck's headlights blazed on, high beams cutting through the dust, and it started rolling forward onto the shoulder, picking up speed. It wasn't pulling back onto the highway. It was pacing me on the shoulder, maintaining the same speed, and I watched in my driver's side mirror as the second and third trucks fell in behind it. They were running a convoy on the shoulder, matching my speed exactly, headlights creating this surreal parade of light through the blowing dust. My heart rate kicked up because this wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate, and I had no idea what they wanted or what they were planning. I pressed the accelerator, pushing my speed up to 50, then 55. The convoy matched me, maintaining that same distance still on the shoulder. The lead truck was maybe 20 feet off my driver's side, close enough that I could see it was a newer model, probably a 2020 or 2021, expensive rig for someone running with no identification. Through the dust, I caught glimpses of the driver, just a dark shape wearing what looked like a baseball cap pulled low, no features visible. The CB crackled to life, making me jump. A voice came through, male, calm, almost casual. "Kenworth driver, you're going to want to slow down and pull over at the next turnout. We need to have a conversation about your cargo." My mouth went dry. The voice didn't threaten, didn't demand, just stated it like a fact, like I didn't have a choice in the matter. I didn't respond, kept my eyes on the road, watching the mile markers tick by. 79, 80, 81. "We know what you're hauling, Holly." The voice came again, using my first name, which sent ice through my veins. "Industrial ceramics, 42,000 pounds, picked up in Reno 3 hours ago. Delivery scheduled for Vegas but running behind. We've been tracking you since you left Tonopah." How did they know my name? How did they know my cargo details? That information should have been secure, locked in the shipping manifest that only dispatch and the receiving warehouse had access to. The convoy was still pacing me, and now I noticed something else that made my situation worse. About a quarter mile ahead, I could see lights, not moving lights, but stationary ones positioned across both lanes. As I got closer, fighting the urge to slam on the brakes or floor it, I realized what I was looking at. 2 more trucks parked nose to nose across the highway, completely blocking both lanes with just enough gap between them that I couldn't squeeze through. They'd set up a roadblock, and the convoy behind me was making sure I couldn't reverse or turn around. The dust was getting worse, wind hammering the trailer so hard I could feel the whole rig shuddering, and I was rapidly running out of road before I'd hit that blockade. The CB crackled again. "Last chance, Holly. Pull over now and we'll keep this simple. Nobody gets hurt. We just need to transfer some items from your trailer to ours. Insurance claim will cover your losses and you drive away. Or you can make this difficult, and trust me, you don't want to see how that plays out." I was doing the math in my head. The blockade was maybe 500 feet ahead now. The convoy was still pacing me on the shoulder. The shoulder itself was gravel and hard pack, but beyond that was desert, rocks, and sagebrush and arroyos that would tear my rig apart if I tried to go off-road. My only options seemed to be stop and deal with whatever these people had planned, or ram the blockade and hope my truck was stronger than theirs. Then I saw it, barely visible through the dust on my right side. An old ranch access road, just 2 dirt tracks leading off into the darkness, probably hadn't been maintained in years. It was my only shot, and I had maybe 10 seconds to decide if I was going to take it. I didn't signal, didn't tap the brakes, just cranked the wheel hard right, and felt every one of those 42,000 pounds shift as the rig lurched off the pavement. The transition from asphalt to dirt was violent, the cab bucking like I'd hit a curb, and I heard something in the trailer shift and crash against the walls. The ranch road, if you could even call it that, was barely wider than my truck. 2 ruts worn into hard desert pan, with a ridge of dead grass and rocks between them scraping against my undercarriage. The headlights showed nothing but darkness and blowing dust ahead. No idea where this road led, or if it would dead end into a wash or canyon that I couldn't see until it was too late. In my mirrors, I caught the convoy's reaction. The lead truck's brake lights flared red, and I could see it swerving, trying to follow me onto the access road but having to slow down because of the angle. The blockade trucks ahead on the highway had already started moving, turning to pursue. But I'd bought myself maybe 30 seconds of distance. The CB exploded with voices now, multiple people shouting coordinates and directions. "He's eastbound on the old Ralston Ranch Road. Cut him off at the junction. Get the Suburban around through Crescent Valley." They had more vehicles than just the trucks. They had this whole operation mapped out with chase cars and alternate routes, and I was heading deeper into their trap without any clue where I was going. The ranch road deteriorated fast, the ruts getting deeper, forcing me to slow to maybe 25 just to keep from ripping the oil pan out on the rocks. Creosote bushes scraped along both sides of the trailer, that distinctive smell mixing with diesel exhaust and dust. I tried my phone. No signal, hadn't had bars since leaving Tonopah. Out here, you were lucky to get emergency calls through, let alone data. The GPS showed I was heading roughly east, away from the highway, into what looked like empty desert for at least 15 miles before the next paved road, some county route that probably saw 1 vehicle a day, if that. Behind me, I could see headlights, at least 3 sets, bouncing through the dust as they followed. They were gaining because they weren't hauling 40 tons of cargo, could navigate the rough terrain faster than I could. The ranch road started climbing slightly, following the contour of a ridge, and I noticed old fence posts on the right side, rusted barbed wire hanging in loops, remnants of whatever cattle operation had used this land decades ago. The posts were close enough to the road that my trailer was clipping them, metal screeching against metal, each impact sending vibrations through the whole rig. Then the road forked, no signs, just 2 equally bad options splitting off into different directions of darkness. The left fork seemed to descend into what might be a dry creek bed. The right climbed higher up the ridge. I took the right on pure instinct, figuring higher ground might give me cell signal or at least a view of what I was dealing with. The grade steepened immediately, and I downshifted, feeling the Kenworth's engine roar as it clawed up the incline. The trailer was fishtailing slightly in the loose gravel, rear tandems struggling for traction, and I had to feather the throttle to keep from sliding backwards. At the top of the ridge, the road leveled out, and I got my first real view of the situation. The dust storm had cleared slightly at this elevation, and I could see vehicle lights spread out below me, at least 6 different sets moving in patterns that were clearly coordinated. 3 were following my track up the ridge. 2 more were circling around to the north on what must have been another access road, and 1 was positioned on the county road to the east, blocking my potential escape route. They had me surrounded on 3 sides, and the only direction I hadn't seen lights was south, deeper into the desert where there were no roads at all. The CB crackled again, different voice this time, older, more authoritative. "Holly, you're making this harder than it needs to be. That road you're on dead ends in about 2 miles at an old stock pond. There's nowhere to go. Save yourself the trouble and the damage to your rig, pull over now, and we'll get this done quick." He was probably right about the dead end. These old ranch roads typically led to water sources or loading corrals and then just stopped. But something in his tone made me certain that quick didn't mean they'd let me drive away after. I kept pushing forward, the road now running along the ridgeline, rocky terrain on both sides dropping away into darkness. My headlights caught something ahead that made me ease off the throttle, an old cattle guard spanning the road, the kind made from railroad rails welded together with gaps between them to keep livestock from crossing. The guard looked ancient, rust-covered, and I had no idea if it would support the weight of a loaded semi. But the trucks behind me were maybe a quarter-mile back now, headlights bouncing as they climbed the grade, and I was out of options. I lined up as straight as I could, said a prayer to whatever deity watches over truck drivers, and rolled on to the cattle guard at maybe 15 miles per hour. The sound was apocalyptic, metal grinding and shrieking, the entire frame of the guard bowing downward as my steer axle crossed, then my drive axles, then the trailer tandems. I felt the back end drop and heard something crack, might have been one of the rails breaking. But the momentum carried me across and the trailer tandems bounced up onto solid ground on the other side. I glanced in the mirror just as the first pursuing truck hit the cattle guard, and it didn't fare as well. The guard, already damaged from my crossing, gave way completely under the lighter but faster-moving Peterbilt, one side collapsing and sending the truck lurching sideways, the driver fighting to keep it from rolling. That bought me maybe another minute, but the 2 trucks circling from the north were already appearing on a parallel ridge, their headlights sweeping across the desert, and I could see they were going to intersect my position soon. The road ahead was getting worse, barely visible now. More of a trail than anything, winding between clusters of Joshua trees and volcanic rock formations. My speed was down to maybe 20, and every bounce and jar was telling me this rig was taking damage that would cost thousands to repair, assuming I survived to worry about repair costs. Then I saw the structure ahead, dark against the slightly lighter sky. Looked like an old mine works or processing facility. Concrete foundation and rusted metal framework, probably abandoned since the 1950s, when all these small mining operations went bust. Next to it was exactly what the voice had warned about. A stock pond, just a depression maybe 50 feet across, currently dry, filled with nothing but cracked mud and tumbleweeds. The road ended there, just stopped at the edge of the old mining site with nowhere else to go. I pulled up to the structure and stopped, engine still running, trying to think through my options. The pursuing vehicles were converging. I could see at least 4 sets of headlights now, coming from different directions, boxing me in. They'd be here in maybe 2 minutes. The mining structure was too small to hide the truck, and even if I could, they knew exactly where I was. I grabbed my phone again, still no signal, not even emergency. The CB was alive with chatter. "He's at the Pershing site, got him cornered, bring the equipment." That last part, bring the equipment, sent a chill through me. Whatever they had planned required specific tools, and my mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. They clearly wanted what was in my trailer, but the way they'd organized this whole operation, the roadblocks, the chase vehicles, the coordination, this wasn't just cargo theft. This was professional, practiced, and they'd done it before. I looked at the mining structure again, really studied it this time. The concrete foundation had openings, probably where conveyor belts had run ore from the mine shaft to processing equipment. Some of the openings were big enough to drive a pickup truck through, and the structure itself seemed to be built into the hillside, might have tunnels or shafts behind it. It was a long shot, probably a dead end, but it was the only option I had besides sitting here waiting for them to arrive. I put the Kenworth in gear and started maneuvering toward the largest opening, a concrete arch maybe 12 feet high and 10 feet wide. The approach was rough, chunks of broken concrete and rusted rebar scattered everywhere, but I took it slow, feeling the tires crunch over debris. The opening led into what looked like a loading bay, concrete floor mostly intact, walls on 3 sides and darkness beyond where the roof had partially collapsed. I pulled in as far as I could, maybe 30 feet, until the trailer was completely inside and my cab was just barely sheltered by what remained of the roof structure. I killed the lights but left the engine running, sitting in darkness listening to the diesel idle and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Through the gaps in the collapsed roof, I could see the headlights approaching, 3 vehicles pulling up to the stock pond area, stopping in a semicircle. Doors opened, figures emerged, 5 men that I could count, all wearing dark clothing. One of them carrying what looked like a heavy-duty bolt cutter, another holding some kind of electronic device, maybe a tablet or scanner. They spotted my truck immediately, no way to hide a 72-foot-long rig, even in the shadows of the structure. One of them pointed, said something I couldn't hear over my engine, and they started walking toward the opening where I'd entered. I watched them approach through my side mirror, trying to figure out if I was trapped or if there was any play left. That's when I noticed something in my passenger mirror, a faint reflection from deeper in the structure behind me, like there might be another opening on the far side, a way through or at least a larger space where the mine shaft itself began. The men were maybe 40 feet from my truck now, spreading out, the one with the bolt cutters heading for my trailer doors while 2 others approached my cab from both sides. The one with the tablet hung back, standing in the headlights of their vehicles, studying his screen. I made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt like my only move. I slammed the transmission into reverse and hit the accelerator. The Kenworth lurched backward, trailer tandems screeching against the concrete floor, and I had maybe 10 feet of clearance before I'd hit whatever was behind me. The men scattered, diving out of the way, and I heard one of them shouting into a radio. I craned my neck, looking through the sleeper berth window trying to see what I was backing into, and caught a glimpse of another opening, wider than I'd hoped, leading into a larger chamber that might have been the main processing area or the mine entrance itself. The trailer cleared the first opening and plunged into total darkness behind me. I was reversing blind now, just hoping I didn't hit a wall or drop into a shaft. The backup alarm was blaring, echoing off unseen walls, and I felt the grade change, sloping downward slightly. Then the trailer jerked to a stop. I'd hit something. But when I looked in the mirror, I realized it wasn't a wall. The trailer had backed into what looked like a tunnel, maybe an old ore cart railway, and it was just barely wide enough to accommodate the width of my trailer. I couldn't go any further back, but I also couldn't pull forward without running over the men who were now recovering from their dive and getting back to their feet. I was stuck, pinned in this concrete structure with no good options, and people who clearly didn't have my best interests in mind closing in from the front. The one with the tablet was talking into his radio again, and within seconds I heard more engines approaching. The chase vehicles that had been cut off by the collapsed cattle guard had found another route and were arriving now. The voice on the CB came through one more time. "Holly, you've got about 30 seconds before we come in there and pull you out. Last chance to do this the easy way." I sat there in the darkness of that mining structure, engine idling, watching 5 men position themselves around the entrance while more headlights appeared in the distance. My hands were shaking on the wheel, not from fear exactly, but from the adrenaline dump of the last 20 minutes. I'd been in tight spots before, blown tires on mountain passes, black ice near Donner Summit, even a brake failure coming down the grapevine. But those were mechanical problems with mechanical solutions. This was different. These were people with a plan, and I was the obstacle they needed to remove. I grabbed the CB mic, keyed it, and spoke for the first time since this whole thing started. "You want to tell me what's really in my trailer? Because I loaded industrial ceramics in Reno, standard freight, nothing worth this kind of effort." The response came back almost immediately, that same authoritative voice from before. "You don't need to know what's in there, Holly. You just need to understand that your company uses your trucks for special deliveries sometimes. Deliveries the regular drivers don't know about. You picked up the wrong load, and now we need to correct that mistake." That statement hit me like cold water. Special deliveries. My company, Silver State Freight, had been running routes across Nevada for 30 years. Family-owned operation, always seemed legitimate. But I'd heard rumors, every trucker has, about companies that moved other things besides what was on the manifest. Drugs, weapons, cash, anything that needed to disappear into the transportation network. I'd always figured Silver State was clean, but now I was wondering if I'd been the clean face for dirty work all along. The man with the tablet was walking closer now, holding his screen up like he was scanning my trailer. He stopped maybe 20 feet from my cab, studied whatever readout he was getting, and nodded to the others. "It's definitely this one, signature matches. Get the doors open and verify the interior load." 2 men moved toward the back of my trailer, the one with bolt cutters already working on my seal lock. I heard the metal snap, then the sound of the trailer doors swinging open. There was silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then one of them shouted, "It's here! Same configuration as the manifest photo. 3rd pallet from the front." 3rd pallet. I thought about my load, how it had been arranged at the warehouse. The ceramics were packed on standard wooden pallets, shrink-wrapped. Nothing remarkable about any of them. But the 3rd pallet, I remembered now, had been loaded last, after the warehouse supervisor had made a phone call and stepped away for 15 minutes. When he came back, a forklift operator I didn't recognize brought that final pallet out, and the supervisor personally verified its position in the trailer before sealing the doors. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it, just standard loading procedure. Now, it made terrible sense. The CB crackled again. "Holly, we're taking 1 pallet, that's all. You can report it stolen, file your insurance claim, nobody gets hurt. You drive back to Vegas with the rest of your load, tell them you got hijacked on 95, and everyone moves on." He made it sound reasonable, almost friendly, like this was just business. But I'd seen their faces, or at least the shapes of them in the headlights. I'd heard their voices on the CB. They couldn't let me go knowing what I knew, even if I didn't fully understand what I knew. I watched in my mirrors as they started working on extracting the pallet. One of them had backed a pickup truck, looked like a heavy-duty Ram 3500, up to my trailer doors. They were using a portable hydraulic lift, the kind landscapers use to lower the pallet from my trailer bed to the pickups. Professional equipment, professional execution. These weren't amateur thieves. The whole operation was taking maybe 5 minutes, and I could see the pallet now as they maneuvered it. Same shrink-wrapped ceramics as the others, nothing visibly different about it. Then I saw what made it special. As they tilted the pallet to get it onto the lift, one corner of the shrink wrap tore slightly, and I caught a glimpse of what was underneath the top layer of ceramic boxes. Metal cases, the kind with foam inserts, the kind used for transporting sensitive equipment or materials that needed serious protection. The ceramics were just camouflage, dead weight to make the load look legitimate. Whatever was in those metal cases was what this whole chase had been about. The man with the tablet was still standing near my cab, and I made a decision that might have been stupid or might have been survival instinct. I grabbed out my phone, made sure the camera was pointed at him through the windshield, and took 3 quick photos with the flash on. The sudden bright light in the darkness made him spin around, and his expression went from professional calm to pure rage in an instant. He started running toward my door, shouting something to the others, and I knew I'd just escalated the situation beyond any chance of walking away. I slammed the Kenworth into drive and punched the accelerator, the truck lurching forward out of the mining structure. The men around my trailer scattered again, and I heard the portable lift crash to the ground as they abandoned the pallet to get clear. My path forward was blocked by their vehicles, 3 trucks and 2 SUVs parked in a semicircle. But I aimed for the gap between 2 of them, a space maybe 2 feet wider than my truck. The side mirrors clipped both vehicles as I forced through, metal screaming and glass shattering, but I made it through and back onto what passed for a road leading away from the mining site. The problem was I had no idea where this road went. I was heading roughly south now, deeper into the desert, away from any highway or help. Behind me, I could hear engines starting, shouts, the whole operation pivoting from controlled extraction to angry pursuit. My headlights showed nothing but sagebrush and rocks ahead, the trail barely visible, and my speed was maybe 30 miles per hour over terrain that wanted to shake the fillings out of my teeth. The trailer was fishtailing constantly, and I could hear things breaking loose inside, the remaining pallets shifting and crashing against the walls. The CB came alive with a different voice now, younger, angrier. "That was a mistake, driver. Now we've got to do this the hard way. You just made this personal." I didn't respond, focused on keeping the truck moving forward, watching for washouts or drop-offs that would end this chase permanently. My mirrors showed headlights spreading out behind me. At least 5 vehicles now, and they were faster than I was on this terrain. The gap was closing. I'd been driving for maybe 10 minutes when the road started climbing again, switchbacks carved into the side of what looked like a larger ridge or small mountain. The grade was steep enough that I had to drop into a lower gear, the engine roaring as it pulled the load upward. The pursuing vehicles were gaining fast on the switchbacks, their lighter weight and higher horsepower letting them take the turns at speeds I couldn't match. I watched the lead vehicle, one of the Peterbilts, come around a turn maybe 200 yards behind me, and I knew I had maybe another minute before they caught up. That's when I saw the turnout ahead, just a wide spot on the uphill side of the road, probably used by maintenance crews or rangers back when this area was more active. It gave me an idea, probably a terrible one, but I was out of good options. I pulled into the turnout, angling the truck so the trailer was blocking most of the road, then jumped out of the cab with my phone and my pocket knife, the only things I had that might be useful. The pursuing vehicles were coming up the switchback now, the lead Peterbilt maybe 30 seconds away. I ran to my trailer, found the airline connections, and used the knife to cut through the glad hand airlines that controlled the trailer brakes. The hiss of escaping air was loud in the night silence, and I felt the trailer settle slightly as the brake pressure released. Then I disconnected the electrical line and the 5th wheel release handle, pulling the pin that connected trailer to tractor. The trailer sat there, still blocking the road but no longer attached to my truck. I sprinted back to the cab, climbed in, and drove forward, leaving the loaded trailer behind as a 53-foot, 40,000-pound roadblock. I watched in the mirror as the lead Peterbilt came around the final turn and hit its brakes hard, realizing too late that the road was completely blocked. The truck stopped maybe 10 feet from my abandoned trailer, and the vehicles behind it started stacking up, unable to get past on the narrow mountain road. I had maybe bought myself 10 minutes, maybe less if they had equipment to move the trailer. But I was now driving a bobtail Kenworth with half a tank of fuel and no real idea where I was going. The road continued climbing, and I followed it because there was no other option, watching my mirrors for signs of pursuit. The grade peaked at what must have been the ridgeline, and suddenly the road started descending the other side, switchbacks even tighter than before. That's when I saw lights in the valley below, not headlights but stationary lights, might be a ranch or a highway maintenance station, some kind of human presence that represented potential help. I started down the mountain, going faster than was safe, the bobtail wanting to slide on every turn because there was no trailer weight to help with traction. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen, seeing one bar of signal appear for the first time in over an hour. I grabbed the phone, tried to dial 911, but the signal dropped before it connected. Tried again. Same result. The third time, it rang twice before a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? I was talking fast, probably not making complete sense, trying to explain about being chased, about cargo theft, about needing help, but I could hear the confusion in her voice. She was asking for my location, and I had no idea what to tell her except that I was somewhere in the desert south of Highway 95, east of Beatty maybe, on an old mining road. She said she'd dispatch Nevada Highway Patrol to the area, but it might take 30 to 45 minutes to get units out there, and she needed me to stay on the line if possible. I kept the call connected, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the dash. Behind me, I could see headlights appearing at the top of the ridge. They'd somehow gotten past my trailer, maybe just pushed it off the side of the road with one of their bigger trucks. They were coming again. The lights in the valley were getting closer, and I could make out more detail now. It was definitely some kind of facility, several buildings arranged in a compound with security lights on poles, a couple of vehicles parked outside. As I got closer, I saw a sign, faded and weathered but still readable in my headlights. Ralston Mining Company, Equipment Depot, no trespassing. The facility looked operational, or at least maintained, not abandoned like the mine site where I'd been trapped before. I pulled into the compound, horn blaring, lights flashing, trying to get attention from anyone who might be there. A door opened in the main building and a figure emerged, older man in a security guard uniform, looking alarmed at the semi-truck that had just roared into his quiet night. I jumped out of the cab, and he could probably see the panic on my face because his hand immediately went to the radio on his belt. "I need help," I shouted across the distance between us. "I'm being chased, people trying to steal my cargo. They've been following me for miles." He looked past me at the road I'd come down, and I saw his expression change when he spotted the headlights descending the mountain. He grabbed his radio, spoke quickly into it, then motioned me toward the building. "Get inside now. We've got protocols for this." I didn't question it, just ran toward the building. Inside was a small office, couple of desks, filing cabinets, and a bank of security monitors showing various angles of the compound. The guard, his name tag said Parmenter, was already on the phone, not with 911 but with someone he called dispatch. He was giving coordinates, describing the situation, and I heard him say, "Probable hijacking in progress. Request immediate NHP and backup security." The headlights outside were getting closer. I could see them on the security monitors, at least 3 vehicles pulling into the compound. Parmenter moved to a locked cabinet, opened it with a key, and pulled out a shotgun. "Standard security equipment for remote sites," he said, seeing my expression. "We get copper thieves, vandals, sometimes worse. This qualifies as worse." The vehicles stopped outside, and I watched on the monitors as doors opened and men got out. I recognized some of them from the mining site, including the one who'd had the tablet. They were conferring, pointing at my bobtail Kenworth, then at the building where Parmenter and I had taken shelter. The man with the tablet pulled out a phone, made a call, and I saw his mouth moving but couldn't hear what he was saying. Parmenter was watching them too, shotgun held ready but not aimed at anyone yet. "They're deciding if it's worth it," he said quietly. "They've got maybe 15 minutes before NHP arrives, probably less. Question is whether they think they can get what they want and get out in that time." I was about to respond when the CB radio in my truck, still visible through the window, crackled to life loud enough that we could hear it through the walls. That authoritative voice again. "Holly, you've just involved people who don't need to be involved. Send out the guard, and we'll forget he was here. This is between you and us." Parmenter looked at me, raised an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" I shook my head. "They've been chasing me since Highway 95, tried to set up a roadblock, chased me through the desert. I don't even know what they want anymore." He studied the monitors again, counting the men outside. 6 of them. All look capable. At least 2 are definitely armed. I can see bulges under their jackets. We've got 1 shotgun and a reinforced door. Not great odds, but I've been in worse. That's when I heard the sound that changed everything. Sirens, still distant but getting closer. The distinctive wail of police vehicles responding Code 3. The men outside heard it too. I could see them react on the monitors, heads turning toward the access road. Urgent conversation, checking their phones. The man with the tablet made a decisive gesture, pointing back toward their vehicles, and they started moving. Not running, but walking quickly, the kind of tactical withdrawal that suggested they'd done this before. Within 30 seconds, all 3 vehicles were turning around, heading back up the mountain road they'd come down. I watched them disappear into the darkness, taillights fading, and felt something in my chest unclench slightly. Parmenter kept the shotgun ready, watching the monitors, not relaxing yet. "They'll be back," he said. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not for you specifically, but this kind of operation doesn't just fold because one job went sideways." The sirens got louder, and I saw lights approaching on the access road, not from the mountain but from the west, the direction of actual civilization. 2 Nevada Highway Patrol units pulled into the compound, light bars blazing, and I'd never been so happy to see law enforcement in my life. The officers got out, hands near their weapons, assessing the situation, and Parmenter stepped outside with his hands visible, the shotgun left inside the office. The senior officer, I could see sergeant stripes on his sleeve even from a distance, approached Parmenter first. They seemed to know each other. Probably regular contact between NHP and security at remote facilities. They talked for maybe 2 minutes, Parmenter gesturing toward me, toward my truck, toward the mountain road where the pursuers had vanished. Then the sergeant walked toward the building and I stepped outside to meet him. "You, Holly Briscoe?" he asked, and I nodded, showed him my license and my commercial driver's credentials. He studied them, then looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. "Dispatch said something about a hijacking attempt, convoy of trucks, roadblocks. That accurate?" I started explaining everything, from the dust storm encounter on 95 to the roadblock, to the chase through the desert, abandoning my trailer, the mining site, all of it. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a small pad, and when I finished, he looked at Parmenter. "You see any of this?" Parmenter nodded toward the monitors. "Got the last part on security cameras. 6 individuals in 3 vehicles appeared to be pursuing this driver, left when they heard your sirens. Vehicles went back up Forest Service Road 347, probably heading for an alternate route out. The sergeant got on his radio, relayed that information, requested additional units to try to intercept. Then he turned back to me. "Your trailer. You said you left it blocking a road up on the ridge?" I confirmed the location as best I could, described the switchback and the turnout. He made another radio call, this time requesting a commercial vehicle recovery team and a cargo inspection unit. "We're going to need to secure that trailer, document everything, and we're definitely going to need to see what's on that third pallet." He said it like he already knew something, like this wasn't a surprise, and I felt that same cold realization from earlier. "You know what this is about, don't you?" I asked. He didn't answer directly, just said, "Let's get you somewhere safe first, then we'll talk about what you might have been hauling." The other NHP officer was securing the perimeter, checking the compound, making sure the pursuers hadn't left anyone behind. Parmenter had gone back inside to review his security footage, probably already making copies for the investigation. I stood there next to my bobtail Kenworth, looking at the damage from forcing through the blockade, the scraped paint and dented panels, thinking about how this night was supposed to be a simple run from Reno to Vegas, thinking about how drastically wrong it had gone. The sergeant's radio crackled, and I heard a voice reporting that they'd found my trailer, still blocking the road, doors open, one pallet missing. They were securing the scene and waiting for the inspection unit. He acknowledged, then looked at me again. "Gonna be a long night, Mr. Briscoe. Might want to get comfortable." They set me up in Parmenter's office with terrible coffee and a chair that had seen better decades while the Nevada Highway Patrol coordinated what was turning into a major operation. Through the window, I could see more units arriving, including an unmarked sedan that had "Federal Agent" written all over it. The sergeant, whose name I learned was Merriweather, came back inside around 3 a.m. with a folder under his arm and an expression that told me the simple hijacking story I'd been telling myself was about to get a lot more complicated. Merriweather sat down across from me, opened the folder, and slid a photograph across the desk. It showed the third pallet from my trailer, the shrink wrap cut away, revealing what I'd glimpsed earlier. Metal cases, military grade from the look of them, stamped with alphanumeric codes I didn't recognize. "You want to tell me what you know about these?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes watching my reaction carefully. I spread my hands. Honestly, nothing. My manifest said industrial ceramics, 42,000 pounds total, standard commercial freight from a Reno warehouse to a Vegas distribution center. I loaded exactly what the paperwork said. He studied me for a long moment, probably running through whatever training he'd had on reading people, determining if I was lying or genuinely ignorant. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slightly and pulled out another document. "Your company, Silver State Freight, has been flagged by federal authorities for about 8 months now. Not the company itself necessarily, but certain shipments, certain routes, certain timing patterns that didn't add up. Your load tonight was one of 3 being monitored." That statement hit me like a gut punch. 8 months of investigation, and I'd been driving right through the middle of it, completely oblivious. "What's in the cases?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Merriweather glanced toward the door, making sure we were alone, then lowered his voice slightly. "Preliminary field testing suggests lithium compounds, rare earth elements, materials used in advanced battery production, and certain types of electronics manufacturing. Not illegal to transport necessarily, but these specific compounds are export controlled, especially in these quantities and without proper documentation." I was trying to process what that meant, connecting dots I didn't even know existed. So someone was using my company to smuggle restricted materials? Where were they actually going? Merriweather flipped through more pages in his folder. "That's the interesting part, the Vegas distribution center you were headed to. Legitimate business. Been operating for 15 years. completely clean. But we've tracked 3 previous loads that never made it there. They got hijacked en route, just like what almost happened to you tonight, except those drivers cooperated, or didn't survive to report accurately. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. "What happened to those drivers?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Merriweather's expression darkened. "One's still missing, presumed dead. One was found in the desert 3 weeks later, dehydrated, confused, claiming he couldn't remember anything after stopping for what he thought was a highway patrol vehicle. The 3rd driver reported the hijacking immediately, helped us start piecing this together, but he quit trucking entirely afterward, relocated to another state." I thought about how close I'd come to being another statistic in that folder, another driver who vanished or emerged broken from the Nevada desert. The people chasing me tonight, they knew about the special cargo. They had equipment, coordination, inside information. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. Merriweather nodded. "We've been trying to identify the organization for months. Your encounter tonight, the photos you took, the pursuit route, it's more evidence than we've collected in all the previous incidents combined. That's why the federal agent is here. This goes beyond state jurisdiction now." As if on cue, there was a knock on the door, and a woman entered, mid-40s, dark suit, federal credentials already in her hand. "Mr. Briscoe, I'm Special Agent Keller, FBI. I need to ask you some detailed questions about tonight's events and about your employment with Silver State Freight." She didn't sit down, just stood there with a recorder in her other hand, and I realized this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. For the next 2 hours, I went through everything again, but this time with a level of detail I hadn't even known I'd observed. Agent Keller wanted descriptions of every vehicle, every person, every word spoken on the CB, the exact location of every turn I'd made through the desert. She was particularly interested in the man with the tablet, the one I'd photographed, and she had me go through my phone's photos with enhancement software, zooming in on reflections in my windshield, background details, anything that might provide identification. One image, enhanced and adjusted, showed a partial license plate on one of the Peterbilts, Nevada commercial plates, and I watched Keller immediately send it to someone via encrypted message. Another photo caught the tablet screen itself, and while I couldn't read what was on it, Keller seemed to recognize the interface. "That's tracking software," she said, more to herself than to me. "Military-grade GPS monitoring, the kind that costs 6 figures and requires security clearance to purchase legally. These people have serious resources and serious connections." The reality of what I'd stumbled into was becoming clearer and more terrifying. This wasn't just cargo theft, it was industrial espionage or worse, potentially materials heading to foreign buyers who shouldn't have access to American-controlled compounds. I'd been the unwitting mule, and the hijackers had been the retrieval team, working for someone who'd set up the whole shell game with my company as the cover. Dawn was breaking when Keller finally shut off her recorder and sat down, looking tired but somehow energized by what we'd uncovered. "Mr. Briscoe, you did everything right tonight. Running instead of stopping, getting to security, making sure law enforcement was involved. Those decisions probably saved your life." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I need you to understand that the people behind this operation are still out there, and they now know you're a witness, a complication they didn't plan for." The implication was clear, and my stomach tightened. "You're saying I'm in danger even now?" Keller exchanged a glance with Merriweather, and he took over the explanation. "We're going to have NHP maintain a presence at your residence for the next few weeks. Plain clothes units, nothing obvious that would alarm your neighbors. And we'd recommend you take some time off from driving, at least until we make arrests and neutralize the immediate threat. Take time off. Simple words that meant my income stopped, my routine shattered, my sense of security permanently altered. But the alternative, continuing to drive routes while looking over my shoulder, wondering if every car in my mirrors was surveillance or threat, that wasn't viable either. "What about Silver State Freight?" I asked. "Are they involved knowingly, or were they being used?" Agent Keller pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "That's still under investigation. Initial evidence suggests your dispatcher, a man named Gerald Vickers, may have been facilitating the special loads without full company knowledge. He's been interviewed and is cooperating, but there are others in the organization we're still examining. For now, consider yourself on administrative leave, with full cooperation from Silver State's ownership. Administrative leave, cooperating witness. Federal investigation." Terms I'd never expected to apply to my life as a simple freight hauler. I thought about my wife, about how I'd explain this when I got home, about whether I'd ever feel safe driving 95 again, or any other lonely highway where trouble could be waiting around the next curve. Parmenter appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee, and I realized he'd been up all night too, managing his own part of this situation. "They're ready to tow your bobtail back to the impound yard," he said. "Trailers being transported separately under federal custody. You'll need to sign some release forms." I followed him out into the compound where the sun was painting the desert in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama that had played out in its darkness. My Kenworth sat there looking battered, paint scraped, mirrors cracked, mud and desert debris coating the undercarriage. She'd gotten me through, though, performed exactly as needed when everything went sideways. A tow truck was backing up to her, professional setup with a boom and straps, and I felt a strange sense of loss watching them prepare to haul her away. That truck had been my office, my sanctuary, my livelihood for 3 years, and now it was evidence in a federal investigation. Merriweather came over with a business card and a manila envelope. "Your personal effects from the cab, your logbook, your permits, everything that's not evidence. Card has my direct number and Agent Keller's contact info. You think of anything else, no matter how small, you call immediately." I took both, the envelope heavier than expected, and realized it contained my life on the road, reduced to a collection of papers and personal items. "What happens now?" I asked, watching the tow truck lift my Kenworth's front axle off the ground. Merriweather looked out at the desert, at the mountain road where I'd been chased just hours ago. "Now we follow the evidence, track down the organization, try to prevent the next shipment from disappearing. You did good work tonight, Holly, whether you meant to or not." Testimony from a driver who actually escaped, who documented the operation, that's going to be crucial in building the case. A NHP unit pulled up to give me a ride back to civilization, back to Tonopah where I could get a rental car and drive home to face whatever came next. As I climbed into the back seat, I looked one more time at the mining facility, at Parmenter standing in his office doorway, at the mountains where I'd abandoned my trailer and run for my life. The desert looked peaceful now in the morning light, giving no indication of the violence and desperation it had witnessed in the darkness. The drive back to Tonopah took 45 minutes, the officer making small talk about weather and road conditions, carefully avoiding the topic of what I'd just been through. My phone, silent for hours in the dead zones, suddenly came alive with messages as we hit civilization. My wife, worried because I hadn't checked in. My dispatcher, terse message about situation awareness. 3 calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably federal investigators or company lawyers. I didn't return any of them yet, just watched the desert slide past the window, thinking about how a routine haul had turned into this, thinking about those metal cases and what they represented, thinking about the men who'd chased me and whether they were already planning their next move. The officer dropped me at a car rental place in Tonopah, handed me another business card, victim services coordinator, and told me someone would be in touch about witness protection protocols if they became necessary. Witness protection. The term hung in the air like a threat or a promise. I couldn't decide which. I rented a basic sedan, something completely unlike my Kenworth, and started the long drive home to Carson City. The radio played country music, traffic reports for roads I wasn't on, and I realized I was checking my mirrors constantly, looking for headlights that matched my speed too perfectly, for vehicles that appeared too often in my peripheral vision. Somewhere near Fallon, I pulled over at a truck stop, not for fuel, but just to sit in the parking lot and watch the normal world go by. Truckers fueling up, families grabbing breakfast, travelers checking maps and planning routes, all of them unaware of the invisible networks of crime and investigation running through the same roads they used. I'd been one of them just yesterday, focused on delivery windows and fuel costs and making it home on time. Now I was something else, a witness, a survivor, someone who knew too much about things I'd never wanted to know. My phone rang, Agent Keller's number. I answered, and she got straight to business. Mr. Briscoe, we've identified 2 of the vehicles from your photos and the partial plate. Both registered to a shell corporation in Elko, same ownership structure as the entities we've been tracking. We're executing search warrants this afternoon, and there's a possibility we'll need you to identify individuals if we make arrests. Can you be available? I said yes, because what else could I say? And she thanked me and ended the call. I sat there in the truck stop parking lot, watching a family load into their minivan, the kids arguing about who got the window seat, the parents looking tired but content, heading home from some vacation or visit. Normal problems, normal lives, and I envied them so much it hurt. I made it home around noon, pulling into my driveway in a rental car instead of my truck, wearing the same clothes from yesterday, probably looking like I'd been through something I couldn't explain. My wife came out before I even got the door open, and the expression on her face, relief mixed with anger mixed with fear, told me she'd figured out something was seriously wrong. I held her for a long time in the driveway, not saying anything yet, just absorbing the reality that I'd made it back, that this particular chapter had ended even if the larger story was still being written. Inside, over coffee I didn't need, and breakfast I couldn't eat, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her hand tight on mine, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment before asking the only question that really mattered. Are we safe? I wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that the federal agents and the highway patrol and all the law enforcement resources being deployed would keep us protected. But I'd seen those men in the desert, seen their coordination and their determination, and I knew that safety was relative now, something that would have to be earned or defended, not assumed. We're doing everything right, I finally answered. Cooperating, staying alert, letting the professionals handle it. That's all we can do. She nodded, accepting that non-answer because she understood the reality as well as I did, and we sat there in our kitchen, the morning sun streaming through windows that suddenly seemed too exposed, too vulnerable, while somewhere out in the desert, federal agents were raiding warehouses and tracking down the people who'd turned my routine haul into a nightmare. 3 days later, Agent Keller called with an update. They'd arrested 7 individuals, seized vehicles and equipment, and disrupted what she called a significant export-controlled materials smuggling operation. My testimony would be needed for the prosecution, probably wouldn't go to trial for at least a year, and in the meantime, I should consider myself under federal witness protocols, which meant regular check-ins, security assessments, and lifestyle adjustments I was still learning to navigate. I never went back to driving for Silver State Freight. The company survived the investigation, barely, but the insurance premiums and reputation damage meant routes were cut, drivers laid off, and I was offered a desk job in dispatch that felt like a cage after years on the open road. I declined and started looking for work with smaller regional carriers, short hauls, daytime runs, routes that didn't take me through the lonely stretches where trouble could be waiting. Sometimes I still dream about that night on Highway 95, about the dust storm and the roadblock and the chase through the desert. I wake up checking mirrors that aren't there, listening for engine sounds that don't exist, and my wife holds me until the adrenaline fades and I remember I'm home, I'm safe, I survived. But there's a part of me that's still out there on that ridge, watching headlights converge, making split-second decisions that mean the difference between going home and disappearing into the Nevada desert. The truth is, I got lucky. Lucky I noticed the convoy early. Lucky I found that ranch road. Lucky Parmenter was working security that night. Lucky the state patrol responded when they did. A dozen points where things could have gone differently, where I could have become another statistic in Agent Keller's folder, another driver who didn't make it home. I think about the one who's still missing, wonder if he's out there somewhere in the desert, wonder if his family still hopes, or if they've accepted what probably happened. I drive past the Highway 95 exit sometimes, heading somewhere else, taking longer routes to avoid that stretch between Tonopah and Beatty. I tell myself it's just practical routing, but I know the truth. I'm not ready to face that road again. May never be ready, because some experiences change you in ways you can't undo. The desert looks the same, indifferent and eternal. But I see it differently now, see the danger hiding in the beauty, the isolation that can trap you as easily as protect you. They say trucking is a solitary profession, and it is, but there's a difference between chosen solitude and forced isolation, between the peace of an empty highway and the terror of being hunted on one. I learned that difference in the worst possible way, and it's a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. Checking mirrors, watching for patterns, never quite trusting that the road ahead is as simple as it appears. The Sonoran Desert in July is the kind of heat that makes you question every life decision that led you to driving through it, and I'd been questioning mine for about the last 100 miles. My name's Thatcher Voss, and I'd been hauling refrigerated loads across the Southwest for roughly 11 years, mostly produce and perishables out of California heading east. That particular week in mid-July, I was running a load of organic vegetables from Salinas to a distribution hub outside Phoenix, standard reefer haul that I'd done variations of maybe 40 times before. The route was straightforward, I-8 east through Yuma, then north on I-10. Nothing complicated about it except the temperature that was pushing 116 degrees, even after sunset. I'd left Yuma around 7 p.m., planning to drive through the night when it was cooler and traffic was lighter, fuel up in Gila Bend, then push through to Phoenix by morning. My reefer unit had been running perfectly when I did my pre-trip inspection, maintaining a solid 36 degrees for the lettuce and broccoli and whatever else was packed in those crates. The truck itself was a 2018 Freightliner Cascadia with about 380,000 miles on it. Well-maintained, company truck that had never given me serious trouble. I remember thinking as I merged onto I-8 that this was going to be one of those boring, uneventful runs where the biggest challenge was staying awake. The first sign something was off came around mile marker 55, maybe 30 miles west of Gila Bend, when I noticed the reefer unit's temperature gauge creeping up. It went from 36 to 38, then to 41, slow enough that I thought maybe it was just working harder against the ambient heat. But when it hit 45 degrees, I knew I had a problem. I'd been monitoring my engine temperature too, and that's when I saw the needle climbing into the red zone, coolant temp way higher than it should be even in desert heat. I immediately started looking for a place to pull over, but this stretch of I-8 is nothing but creosote flats and distant mountains. No services, no pull-offs wide enough for a semi, just the shoulder and the desert. I managed to nurse it another 3 miles before the engine temperature hit critical, and I had no choice but to pull onto the shoulder and shut down. The moment I killed the engine, I could hear the reefer unit struggling, that labored sound of a compressor working against a failing system. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out into heat that hit me like a physical wall. Even at 8:30 at night, the air temperature had to be over 100 degrees. I popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. Coolant pooling underneath. Steam rising from somewhere in the engine bay, and when I traced the leak, I found a split radiator hose, the kind of failure that happens when rubber gets old and heat-stressed and finally gives up. I had a spare hose in my toolkit. Every driver carries basics, but when I pulled it out and compared it to the failed one, I realized I'd grabbed the wrong size at my last supply stop. The spare was for my previous truck, different engine configuration, wouldn't fit no matter how much I forced it. I was stranded on I-8 with a load of organic produce that was currently sitting at 52 degrees and climbing, a dead engine, and the nearest service was Gila Bend, too far to walk and too far to tow without serious expense that my company would have questions about. I tried my phone first, dispatch number, but the call kept dropping. Signal out here was terrible, maybe 1 bar if I was lucky. I walked up and down the shoulder trying to find a sweet spot where the signal might be stronger, but it was useless. The CB radio was my next option, and I climbed back in the cab, switched it on, and started calling out on Channel 19. "This is eastbound Freightliner at mile marker 58, broken down, need assistance. Anyone copy?" Static for about 30 seconds, then a voice came through, female, calm, and professional. "Eastbound Freightliner, this is Mobile Repair Unit. What's your situation?" I explained the radiator hose, the reefer unit, warming up, the load that was time-sensitive. The voice responded almost immediately. "Copy that. I'm actually about 15 miles west of Gila Bend, heading your direction. Can be there in maybe 20 minutes. I carry common hoses, should be able to get you fixed and back on the road." It seemed too good to be true. A mobile repair unit just happening to be in the area, but I'd heard of independent mechanics who worked the I-8 corridor, servicing stranded truckers for cash, usually charging a premium but getting you moving faster than waiting for official road service. I gave her my exact location, mile marker and direction, and she confirmed she'd be there soon. I spent the waiting time checking the reefer unit, which was now showing 61 degrees and still climbing. At this rate, I had maybe 2 hours before the produce started getting compromised, and my company had strict protocols about temperature excursions. Anything over 65 degrees for more than an hour meant the whole load got rejected. Thousands of dollars of organic vegetables turning into expensive compost, and probably my job turning into a job search. The headlights appeared in my mirror about 25 minutes later, a pickup truck towing a small utility trailer, the kind setup you'd see from an independent contractor. The truck pulled up behind me, hazards on, and the driver got out. She was maybe mid-30s, wearing work clothes that had seen plenty of engine grease, carrying a large toolbox. "You're Thatcher?" she asked, and I nodded. "I'm Sybil Garner. Let's take a look at what you've got." Her voice was the same one from the CB, and something about her directness put me slightly at ease. She seemed competent, professional, exactly what I needed. She inspected the failed hose, nodded like she'd seen it 100 times, and went back to her trailer. When she returned, she had a radiator hose that looked like it might fit, along with hose clamps and coolant. "This should work," she said, already positioning herself to access the engine bay. "Going to take me maybe 30-40 minutes to replace it, flush the system and get you topped off. Your reefer unit, that's a separate issue. Could be related to the engine cooling problem, or could be its own compressor issue. Won't know until we get the engine sorted. I watched her work, impressed by how efficiently she moved. Clearly, someone who'd done this repair many times. While she worked, I tried my phone again. Still no signal, and the CB was quiet except for occasional static bursts. "You work this stretch often?" I asked, making conversation, but also trying to understand how she'd happened to be in exactly the right place. She glanced up from the engine bay. "I cover I-8 from Yuma to Gila Bend, mostly night shifts when the heat isn't as bad and truckers are more likely to have problems. Been doing it about 3 years, good business. Lots of rigs break down out here." That made sense, and I started to relax a bit, figuring I'd gotten lucky that she was in the area. She finished the hose replacement, added coolant, and told me to try starting the engine. It turned over clean, no warning lights, temperature gauge sitting right where it should be. "Engine's good," she said. "Now let's check your reefer." She walked back to the trailer unit, opened the access panel, and I heard her moving things around, checking connections. After a few minutes, she came back to the cab where I was monitoring the temperature display. "Bad news," she said, and my stomach dropped. "Your reefer compressor's seized. Probably overheated when the engine coolant system failed. Heat stress pushed it over the edge. I can't fix that here. You'd need a full compressor replacement, probably a shop in Phoenix or back in Yuma." I did the math in my head. The produce was at 68 degrees now, climbing a degree every few minutes. Even if I got towed to the nearest shop, it would be hours before the repair was done. The load was already compromised. Sybil seemed to read my expression. "There might be an option," she said slowly, like she was considering whether to offer it. "There's a place about 12 miles south of here, old ranch property that got converted to a cold storage facility. They handle overflow from the Yuma ag operations. Might be able to take your load temporarily, keep it refrigerated while you get your reefer fixed. Owner's a guy named Ridley, Alban Ridley. He's helped out truckers before when they had cooling failures." It sounded like a potential solution, better than watching thousands of dollars of produce turn into garbage on the side of the highway. "How do I get there?" I asked. Sybil pulled out a phone, brought up a map, showed me a route that left I-8 at the next exit, then followed a series of county roads and what looked like dirt tracks south into the desert. "It's not on GPS," she said. "Old property. Been there since before digital mapping was a thing. But I can guide you there, make sure you don't get lost. Ridley's usually around at night, keeps the facility running 24/7 during harvest season." I hesitated. Something about leaving the interstate and heading into the desert on unmarked roads felt wrong. But the alternative was explaining to my company why I'd let an entire load spoil when there was a potential solution available. "What's he charge for the storage?" I asked. Sybil shrugged. "Depends on how long you need it. Probably a few $100s a day, but that's better than losing the whole load, right?" The logic made sense, and I was running out of time to make a decision. The temperature gauge showed 72 degrees now, officially in the rejection zone. "All right," I said, "show me how to get there." Sybil nodded, walked back to her pickup. "Follow me, I'll take you right to it. Just stay close, some of these turns are easy to miss in the dark." She climbed into her truck, pulled out around me, and started heading east. I got the Freightliner moving, engine running smooth now, but the reefer unit completely dead. Just a silent box on my chassis holding produce that was slowly cooking in the desert heat. We took the next exit, mile marker 62, and immediately the road quality deteriorated. What started as a paved county road quickly became patched asphalt, then gravel, then hard-packed dirt that my rig could handle but wasn't ideal for. Sybil's taillights were my only guide, and I kept my distance to about 50 feet, close enough to follow but far enough to avoid her dust cloud. The headlights showed nothing but desert on both sides, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, creosote bushes, and the occasional palo verde tree. We'd been driving for maybe 15 minutes when I started noticing things that didn't add up. The road we were on was getting narrower, barely wide enough for my truck, and there were no signs, no markers, nothing indicating this was a route to any kind of commercial facility. I tried the CB, calling out to Sybil, "Hey, how much further to this cold storage place?" Her response came back slightly distorted. "Just another few miles. The property's set back from the main roads. Owner likes his privacy." Privacy for a cold storage facility that supposedly handled commercial overflow didn't make much sense, but I'd committed to this route now, and turning around on this narrow track with a 53-foot trailer would be nearly impossible. I kept following, watching the odometer tick off miles, 12 miles from the interstate becoming 15, then 17. The terrain was getting rougher, too, the road climbing slightly into rocky hills, and I had to drop my speed to maybe 15 miles per hour to avoid damaging the suspension. That's when Sybil's brake lights came on, and she pulled to the side of the road. I stopped behind her, put on my parking brake, and watched as she got out of her truck and walked back toward my cab. When she got close enough to see in my headlights, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. She was carrying something in her right hand, partially concealed behind her leg, but the shape was unmistakable even in the shadows. A crowbar, the heavy kind used for forcing things open, and she was gripping it like she knew how to use it. I hit the door lock button, that reassuring thunk of the mechanism engaging, and grabbed my phone. Still no signal. Completely dead out here. Sybil stopped about 10 feet from my cab, and when she spoke, her voice had changed, no longer professional and helpful, now flat and cold. "Thatcher, you're going to want to step out of the truck. We need to have a conversation about your load and about making some adjustments to your delivery schedule." I kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, trying to project calm while my mind raced through options. The crowbar in Sybil's hand caught the reflection of my headlights, and I could see her stance had changed too, weight forward, ready for confrontation. Through the windshield, I spoke loud enough for her to hear. "I'm not opening this door. Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't going to work. My company tracks every truck with GPS. They know exactly where I am." Her laugh was short and bitter. "Your company's GPS shows you pulled off at mile marker 62 due to mechanical failure, which is accurate. And these back roads, they don't exist on most tracking systems, too remote, too old. We've got maybe 2 hours before anyone notices you're not moving toward Gila Bend." She shifted the crowbar to her other hand, casual, like she was just holding a walking stick. "But we're not going to need 2 hours. This can be simple, Thatcher. We transfer your load to another truck, you file a hijacking report, insurance covers your company's loss, and you drive away with a story to tell. Nobody gets hurt." The way she said it, like she'd given this speech before, like this was a rehearsed operation, sent ice through my veins despite the desert heat still radiating from the ground. I glanced at my mirrors, looking for any sign of other vehicles or lights, but there was nothing except darkness and the silhouettes of saguaros against the stars. My engine was still running. Technically, I could try to maneuver around her truck, but the road was barely wide enough for one semi, and I had no idea what was ahead or how far this track went before it became completely impassable. "Where's this cold storage facility you mentioned?" I asked, stalling for time, trying to understand the full scope of whatever trap I'd driven into. Sybil's expression didn't change. "There is no facility, Thatcher. That was just a story to get you off the interstate and onto roads where we have control. The ranch property exists, belongs to my partner, but it's not processing ag overflow. It's a transfer point for loads we've been acquiring from drivers who found themselves in situations just like yours. My hands tightened on the wheel. The phrase, acquiring from drivers, had implications I didn't want to think about too hard, but I needed information. How many drivers? I asked. Her pause before answering told me the number was higher than I wanted to know. Enough that we've got the system down to a science. Mechanical failures happen all the time out here. Heat stress on engines, cooling systems, tire blowouts. Sometimes those failures are natural. Sometimes they're encouraged with the right tools applied at the right moment. Either way, driver needs help. We provide help. Driver ends up here, and we have a business transaction. That statement hit me like a punch. She was admitting to sabotaging trucks, creating the very emergencies she then offered to solve, all to funnel drivers into this isolated area where they were vulnerable. I thought back to my radiator hose failure, how it had seemed like normal wear and tear, but now I wondered if maybe she'd been following me, waiting for an opportunity, possibly even creating one. "You caused my hose to fail?" I asked, voice harder than I'd intended. Sybil shrugged. "Didn't need to with yours. You were already broken down when I found you, genuine failure. Just good luck on our part. But yeah, sometimes we help things along. Small cut in a radiator hose, loosened valve stem, stuff that'll fail after a few miles of heat stress. Drivers never suspect because it looks natural." She took a step closer to my truck. "Now, you've got a choice. Either you cooperate, we do this clean and professional, or you make it difficult and we do it anyway, but you don't drive away. Your call." I was trying to process what "you don't drive away" meant when headlights appeared behind Sybil's truck, coming from the direction we'd traveled. Another vehicle, moving slow, deliberate, and as it got closer, I could see it was a large pickup, probably a 1-ton dually, towing what looked like a refrigerated trailer, the kind used for small-scale cold transport. The truck pulled up next to Sybil's and a man got out, older than her, maybe late 50s, wearing ranch clothes that looked like they'd seen decades of desert work. He walked up to Sybil, said something I couldn't hear, and she nodded toward my truck. The man looked at me through the windshield, his expression unreadable in the headlight glare, then moved to inspect my trailer, walking around it like a buyer examining livestock. He checked the doors, looked at the reefer unit, spent a solid 2 minutes just studying the setup. When he came back to the front, he stood next to Sybil, and this time when he spoke, his voice was loud enough for me to hear clearly. "Produce load, organic, probably high value based on the packaging I can see through the trailer vents. Temperature's compromised, but not critical yet. We can salvage it, transfer to our unit, have it in a proper cold room within an hour." Sybil nodded. "Thatcher here is considering his options. Thought maybe you could help explain the situation, Albin." So this was Ridley, the ranch owner she'd mentioned, the partner in this operation. Albin Ridley stepped closer to my cab, his manner almost friendly, like we were negotiating a legitimate business deal. "Mr. Voss, I understand this seems concerning, but let me assure you we're not barbarians. We run a simple operation. We acquire loads that are already in distress, loads that would be rejected by their original buyers anyway, due to temperature excursions or delays. We give those loads a second market, sell them to discount distributors. Everyone benefits except the insurance companies, and frankly, they can afford the loss." His rationalization was smooth, practiced, probably the same speech he'd given to however many other drivers had ended up in this exact position. But the crowbar in Sybil's hand and the isolation of this location told a different story about what happened when drivers didn't cooperate with this simple operation. I kept my voice steady. "And if I refuse? If I just turn this truck around and head back to the interstate, Albin's friendly expression didn't change, but his words carried clear threat. Then you'd be making a very poor decision. This road doesn't lead back to I-8, not from this point. Goes deeper into the ranch property, eventually dead ends at an old mining claim about 15 miles south. You'd run out of fuel before you found a way out, assuming your truck could even navigate the terrain, which it can't. And your phone, I'm sure you've noticed, doesn't work out here. We're in what the cellular companies call a dead zone. Nearest tower is 40 miles east. He was right about the phone, and his knowledge of the road system suggested he was telling the truth about the route being a dead end. I was boxed in, literally and figuratively, with two people who'd clearly done this before, and a load of produce that was losing value by the minute. "What's to stop me from reporting this whole thing once you let me go?" I asked. "You've admitted to sabotaging trucks, to cargo theft, to running a criminal operation." Sybil answered that one, her tone almost amused. "Report it to who exactly? You followed a repair person off the interstate voluntarily. No one forced you. You drove to a private property seeking cold storage, again, your choice. And when you get back to civilization and make these accusations, all you'll have is a story about a helpful mechanic and a rancher who was unfortunately unable to help you with storage because his facility was full. No evidence, no witnesses, just your word against ours." She was right, and that realization settled in my stomach like lead. Any story I told would sound paranoid, unprovable, especially when they could produce receipts for the legitimate repair work Sybil had done on my radiator hose. It would be my word against theirs, and I'd be the driver who lost a valuable load in the process, facing questions from my company about why I deviated from the approved route. They'd thought this through, probably refined the operation over multiple iterations, closing every loophole that might expose them. Albin pulled out a phone, not for a call but to show me something on the screen. It was a photo, another semi-truck, different company livery, parked in what looked like this exact location. "That driver cooperated," he said. "Made his report, got paid by his insurance, found new work with a different company, drove away from here safe and sound." He swiped to another photo, different truck, same location. This one cooperated too. Insurance payout, no complications. He swiped again, and this time the photo showed a truck that looked damaged, windows broken, paint scraped, sitting in what appeared to be a ravine or wash. This driver didn't cooperate. Tried to run, ended up rolling his truck in a wash about 8 miles from here. Took rescue crews 2 days to find him. The implication was clear, and I felt my mouth go dry. "What happened to that driver?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Albin put his phone away. "Dehydration, exposure, some injuries from the rollover. Spent a week in the hospital, told a story about mechanical failure and losing control. Didn't mention us. Didn't mention any of this because he understood that some stories are better left untold." The threat underlying those words was unmistakable. I was running calculations in my head, trying to figure out any angle that gave me an advantage. Any move that didn't end with me either complying with their demands or ending up like the driver in the ravine. My eyes went to the fuel gauge, 3/4 of a tank. Maybe enough to go a significant distance if I could find a route. The CB radio was an option, but Sybil and Albin would hear any transmission, would know I was calling for help. My best chance seemed to be cooperating enough to stay safe while looking for an opportunity to escape or alert someone to what was happening. "All right," I said slowly, watching their reactions. "Say I cooperate. How does this work exactly?" Albin's expression relaxed slightly, like he'd won a negotiation he'd been confident about all along. "Simple process. You unlock your trailer, we transfer the pallets to our refrigerated unit using our equipment. Takes maybe 45 minutes. Once the transfer is complete, we drive our separate ways. You head back toward I-8 using a different route that actually connects to the highway, about 20 miles north of here. You call your company, report that you were hijacked by unknown individuals while broken down, describe it however you want, except you don't describe us or this location. Insurance handles the loss, and in 2 days, you'll have forgotten this ever happened. In 2 days, I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my career, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, "What guarantee do I have that you'll actually let me go?" Sybil answered, still holding that crowbar. "You don't have guarantees, Thatcher. You have our track record, which is that we're in the cargo business, not the violence business. Keeping you safe keeps us safe, draws less attention, fewer complications. We've done this 19 times in the past 8 months, and 19 drivers went home to their families. You'll be number 20. 19 times. 19 drivers who'd been manipulated or forced into this exact situation, and apparently all of them had chosen compliance over resistance. I wondered how many of them still drove these routes, how many had quit or changed careers, how many lay awake at night replaying the decision they'd made on a dark desert road. I also wondered if all 19 had really made it home safely, or if Albin's photos only showed the success stories. My hand moved toward the door lock, hovering over the button, every instinct screaming at me not to give up the one barrier between me and them. But Albin was already moving toward my trailer, pulling out a set of bolt cutters from his truck, clearly prepared to access my cargo with or without my cooperation. If I stayed locked in the cab, they'd just take what they wanted and leave me here, possibly disabled my truck to ensure I couldn't follow or interfere. At least if I played along, I might find an opening, might be able to get information that could be useful later. I unlocked the door and stepped down from the cab, keeping my distance from both of them, positioning myself so I could see both their vehicles and mine, maintaining awareness of my surroundings. The desert night was quiet except for the idle of our engines and the occasional sound of wildlife moving in the creosote bushes. The temperature had dropped to maybe 95 degrees, almost comfortable compared to the daytime heat, but sweat was still running down my back, partly from the climate and partly from the adrenaline coursing through my system. Albin walked to my trailer doors with the bolt cutters, made quick work of my seal, and swung the doors open. Even from 20 feet away, I could smell the produce, that distinctive scent of organic vegetables, and I could see him nodding with satisfaction as he inspected the load. "Quality product," he called back to Sybil. "Should fetch good money through our distributors even with the temperature excursion." He pulled out his phone again, made a call, spoke briefly in terms I couldn't quite hear, then hung up and turned to me. "Transfer crew will be here in 10 minutes. They'll handle the heavy work." Transfer crew. There were more people involved in this operation, probably rotating teams to minimize individual exposure, spreading the risk across multiple participants. This wasn't just Sybil and Albin. This was organized, structured, possibly extending beyond just this one location. I thought about the 19 other drivers, wondered if any of them had tried to map out the full scope of what they'd stumbled into, if any of them had gone to authorities with information that might have been dismissed as uncorroborated. Headlights appeared in the distance again, 2 sets this time, approaching from the south, from deeper in the ranch property. As they got closer, I could make out a flatbed truck with a small forklift secured to the bed and a cargo van following behind it. They pulled up, positioning themselves for efficient access to both my trailer and Albin's refrigerated unit, and 4 men got out, all wearing work clothes, all moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this exact job multiple times before. None of them spoke to me, didn't even acknowledge my presence except for occasional glances to make sure I wasn't interfering. They unloaded the forklift, fired it up, and started transferring pallets from my trailer to Albin's reefer unit. I watched the operation, counting pallets, noting how they checked each one against some kind of manifest Albin was holding, probably verifying the load against shipping documents they'd somehow obtained. The whole thing was professional, methodical, almost corporate in its execution, which somehow made it more disturbing than if it had been chaotic or desperate. Sybil had moved closer to me, not threatening but watchful, making sure I didn't try anything stupid. I used the opportunity to ask questions, partly to gather information and partly to keep her talking, keep the situation from escalating. "How'd you know I'd be on I-8 tonight?" She considered whether to answer, then shrugged. "We monitor CB traffic, track patterns, know which companies run which routes on which schedules. When we hear about a high-value load moving through our operating area, we pay attention. Sometimes we get lucky with natural breakdowns. Sometimes we create opportunities. Your radiator hose was natural, just fortuitous timing. Fortuitous for them, catastrophic for me." I watched another pallet get transferred, my load disappearing into their operation, my career potentially disappearing with it. And if my company doesn't believe the hijacking story? If they think I'm involved somehow? Sybil's expression didn't change. "Then you'll have bigger problems than what happened here tonight." But most companies take the insurance payout and move on, cheaper than investigating, and drivers usually get the benefit of the doubt on first incidents. You'll be fine as long as you keep the story simple. The transfer was almost complete. 12 pallets now in Albin's reefer unit, just 2 left in my trailer. I was running out of time to figure out a move, to find some angle that gave me leverage or escape. My truck was still running, keys in the ignition. Technically, I could make a run for it, but with 6 people here and multiple vehicles, I wouldn't make it far before they cut me off or forced me off whatever road I tried to take. And Albin's story about the driver in the ravine suggested they were willing to use force if necessary. The last pallet came out of my trailer, and one of the crew members closed my doors, securing them with a new seal that Albin provided, probably to make my hijacking story look more legitimate. Albin walked over, handed me a piece of paper with directions written in neat handwriting. "Follow this route north. You'll hit a county road that connects to I-8 about 15 miles east of where you broke down. Make your calls from there, stick to the basic story, and we all get to go about our business." I took the paper, studied the directions, trying to memorize landmarks and turns that might be useful if I needed to guide authorities back here later. But even as I read it, I knew Albin was probably giving me a route that wouldn't reveal anything useful, that would loop around the actual transfer location, that would leave investigators with nothing but empty desert if they tried to follow my description. "What happens to drivers who don't stick to the basic story?" I asked, looking him directly in the eyes. His smile was cold. "Let's hope you never have to find out." The crew finished loading their refrigerated unit and started packing up their equipment, moving with the same efficient silence they'd maintained throughout the transfer. I stood there holding Albin's directions, watching my entire load disappear into their operation, feeling the weight of decisions I hadn't really been given the chance to make. Sybil had moved back to her pickup truck, the crowbar now stored somewhere out of sight, but her presence still felt threatening even at a distance. The forklift was being secured back onto the flatbed, tie-down straps being tightened by men who wouldn't make eye contact with me. Albin walked over to his refrigerated trailer, checked something on the reefer unit's control panel, then came back to where I stood. "Temperature's holding at 38 degrees, he said, like we were colleagues discussing normal logistics. "Your produce will be fine. Probably better than if it had stayed in your dead unit. We'll have it distributed through our network by tomorrow afternoon. Nobody wastes food, everybody makes money except the insurance company." His attempt to frame this as some kind of victimless crime, as if I should feel good about the efficiency of their theft, made my jaw clench. "Those 19 other drivers," I said, keeping my voice level. "They all just drove away and forgot about this?" Albin's expression remained neutral. "They made the smart choice, same one you're making right now. They understood that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. They went home, filed their reports, collected their paychecks, and moved on with their lives. No reason you can't do the same." Except I knew that wasn't the whole story. The driver in the ravine proved they were willing to use violence when compliance wasn't guaranteed, and I suspected that photo he'd shown me wasn't the only incident that had gone beyond simple cargo theft. "What about the driver who's missing? You said one of the previous drivers is still missing." Albin's pause before answering told me I'd touched on something he hadn't intended to discuss. That situation was complicated. Driver made some poor decisions after he left here, got himself into trouble that had nothing to do with us. But that's the risk when people don't follow simple instructions. The implication was clear. Follow instructions or face consequences that might be attributed to other causes. I thought about how easy it would be to make a driver's disappearance look like something else, a wrong turn in the desert, a decision to abandon a truck and flee, personal problems that led to voluntary disappearance. They'd clearly thought through every angle, every potential exposure, every way a driver might become a liability instead of a complicit witness. The flatbed truck and the cargo van were pulling away now, heading back south into the ranch property, leaving just Sybil's pickup, Albin's truck with the loaded reefer, and my empty Freightliner. Albin checked his watch, an old analog piece that looked like it had been through decades of ranch work. "You should get moving, Thatcher. Follow those directions exactly. Don't deviate, don't try to explore or map the property. The route I gave you is the safe way out. Other roads on this land lead to places you don't want to end up." I wanted to ask what he meant by that, what other places existed on this property, but his tone suggested the conversation was over. Sybil started her truck, gave me a final look through her windshield that I couldn't quite read. Might have been warning or might have been something else, then pulled out heading north on what I assumed was the route they wanted me to follow. Albin gestured toward my Freightliner. "Engine's running fine, should get you back to the highway without issues. Make your call from a truck stop, somewhere public with witnesses and security cameras. Makes your story more believable." He was coaching me on how to sell the lie, giving me instructions on creating a convincing narrative for authorities and my company. I folded the directions and put them in my pocket, walked back to my truck, and climbed into the cab. Through the windshield I could see Albin standing there watching me, making sure I actually followed through. I put the Freightliner in gear and started rolling north, following Sybil's taillights through the darkness. The road was rough, washboarded in places, and my empty trailer bounced and rattled without the weight of cargo to stabilize it. I checked my mirrors constantly, watching for Albin's headlights, but he'd stayed back at the transfer point, probably waiting to make sure I was committed to the route before heading his own direction with my stolen load. Sybil maintained a steady pace about a quarter-mile ahead, her brake lights occasionally flaring when the road got particularly bad. My mind was racing through possibilities, trying to figure out if there was any move I could make that wouldn't end with me in a ravine or worse. The CB radio was useless out here, no one to call, and even if I tried to broadcast my location, Sybil would hear it immediately. My phone still showed no signal, the cellular dead zone apparently covering a huge swath of this ranch property. I was following directions from people who'd just robbed me, trusting them to actually lead me to safety rather than deeper into a trap. About 15 minutes into the drive, the terrain started changing, getting rockier, more elevated, like we were climbing into foothills. The road made a series of switchbacks, and I had to drop my speed to maybe 10 miles per hour to negotiate the turn safely with an empty trailer. At the top of one rise, I caught a glimpse of lights in the distance to the east. Might have been the interstate or might have been Gila Bend. Hard to tell from this angle. But it gave me a reference point, a direction that represented civilization and safety. Sybil's truck disappeared around a bend ahead, and when I came around the same turn, I saw her brake lights were on, and she was stopped in the middle of the road. My first thought was another setup, another complication, but as I got closer I could see why she'd stopped. The road forked here, two equally rough tracks heading in different directions, and there was no indication which one matched Albin's directions. I pulled up behind her, left my engine running, and she got out of her truck and walked back to my cab. I rolled down the window just a few inches, enough to hear her but not enough to give her access to the cab. "Left fork," she said, pointing. "Takes you to the county road that connects to I-8. Right fork loops back into the property. You don't want to take it." She seemed almost helpful now, the threatening demeanor from earlier replaced with something that might have been professional courtesy or might have been performance. "How far to the county road?" I asked. She checked her phone, which apparently had signal even though mine didn't, possibly because she had equipment or access that regular phones lacked. "Maybe 8 miles, mostly downhill from here. You'll see a cattle guard at the county road intersection. Cross that and turn east. You'll hit I-8 in about 20 minutes. She studied my expression, maybe trying to gauge whether I was going to follow instructions or try something else. "Thatcher, I know this feels wrong, and yeah, it is wrong. But you made it through. You're going home. That's more than some people in your situation can say." The statement hung in the air between us, confirmation that not everyone who'd encountered their operation had survived or escaped intact. I wanted to ask her about the missing driver, about what had really happened, but I also knew that pushing for answers might trigger a reaction I couldn't control. "Why are you doing this?" I asked instead. "You're clearly capable, could probably make decent money legitimately. Why set up drivers like this?" Sybil was quiet for a moment, and in the headlight glow, I could see her face clearly for the first time. The weathering from years in the desert sun, the hard set of her jaw that suggested she'd made peace with her choices, because the margins in legitimate work keep shrinking, and the bills keep coming. Because corporations squeeze every dollar out of drivers and mechanics alike. And sometimes you get tired of being on the losing end. This operation, it's just reallocating resources from people who can afford the loss to people who can't. It was the same rationalization Albin had used, framing theft as economic justice, as if victimizing individual drivers was somehow striking back at corporate greed. I didn't buy it, knew it was just justification for criminal behavior, but arguing the point while sitting vulnerable on a dark road didn't seem wise. "The driver who's missing," I said, "what really happened to him?" Sybil's expression hardened. "He tried to be a hero, thought he could gather evidence and take us down. Drove off with a tracker we didn't know about, recorded conversations, took photos. Then he tried to sell that information to people who had their own interests in keeping our operation quiet. Last anyone saw him, he was heading toward Mexico with a briefcase full of cash. Maybe he made it, maybe he didn't. Point is, being smart is better than being brave." The story didn't quite make sense, had holes and inconsistencies that suggested it wasn't the full truth. But it served as another warning, another example of what happened when drivers didn't play along with the program. "I'm not looking to be a hero," I said, which was absolutely true. "I just want to get back to the highway and forget this happened." Sybil nodded, accepting that statement. "Then take the left fork, follow it to the county road, make your calls from somewhere safe. And Thatcher, when you tell your story, keep it simple. Don't mention mechanics or ranchers or transfer crews. Just say you got hijacked by unknown individuals after a breakdown. The less detail you provide, the more believable it is." She walked back to her truck, climbed in, and took the left fork without looking back. I sat there for a moment, considering my options, looking at the right fork and wondering where it really led, wondering if it might take me to evidence or information that could bring down this operation. But Albin's warning about dangerous places on the property and Sybil's story about the missing driver kept me from exploring. I took the left fork, following her taillights once again. The road descended through rocky terrain, passing what looked like abandoned ranch structures, old corrals, and a collapsed barn that suggested this property had once been a working cattle operation. I tried to memorize landmarks, anything that might help authorities locate this area if I decided to report what had really happened. A distinctive rock formation that looked like a sentinel, an old windmill missing its blades, a dry creek bed with cottonwood trees marking its path. But even as I cataloged these details, I knew the property was probably vast enough that these markers would be useless without GPS coordinates I didn't have. Sybil's truck reached the bottom of the descent, and I saw her cross what must have been the cattle guard she'd mentioned. The distinctive rumble of tires on metal grating. She turned east without stopping, her taillights disappearing quickly as she accelerated onto what was apparently better road surface. I followed, felt my own tires hit the cattle guard, and suddenly I was on a maintained county road, paved and marked with actual lines and signs. The transition from isolated ranch property to public road was jarring, like crossing back into normal reality after being in a nightmare dimension. My phone came alive with signal, notifications flooding in from the hours I'd been in the dead zone, missed calls from dispatch, text messages asking for status updates, alerts from my company's tracking system questioning why I deviated from my route. I ignored them all for the moment, focused on getting to I-8 and finding somewhere public to stop. Sybil's truck was already far ahead, probably pushing 70 on this empty county road, putting distance between us now that her job was done. I reached I-8 about 25 minutes later, the interstate looking like a beacon of civilization after the isolated chaos of the ranch property. There was a truck stop at the intersection, one of those smaller independent operations that catered to local traffic and the occasional long-haul driver. I pulled in, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and just sat in my cab for a few minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. My trailer was empty, seal broken and replaced with one that probably had a serial number that would check out as legitimate, even though the transfer it supposedly secured had never happened at a legitimate facility. My load was gone, distributed through criminal networks to buyers who probably had no idea they were receiving stolen goods. And I had a story to tell that would either be believed and result in an insurance payout, or be questioned and result in suspicion falling on me. I grabbed my phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then called dispatch. The night supervisor answered, annoyed that I was calling so late but concerned when I told him I needed to report a hijacking. He patched me through to the security department, and I went through the basic story, broken down at mile marker 58. Reefer failure, attempted to find help, was approached by armed individuals who forced me to surrender my load. I kept it vague like Sybil had advised, didn't mention mechanics or ranchers or specific locations, just described generic threats and a generic transfer to unknown vehicles. The security officer asked detailed questions, wanted to know about the individuals, their vehicles, their exact words. I provided descriptions that were intentionally imprecise, details that could apply to thousands of people and vehicles in Arizona. The officer seemed satisfied, said he'd file a report with state police and with our insurance carrier, told me to stay where I was until law enforcement arrived to take an official statement. I agreed and ended the call, then sat there in the parking lot, watching other trucks come and go, drivers living their normal nights while I dealt with the aftermath of something abnormal. Arizona Department of Public Safety showed up about 45 minutes later, 2 officers in a marked unit. They took my statement, photographed my empty trailer and the replacement seal, asked me to walk them through the timeline of events. I stuck to the script, broken down, hijacked, forced to comply, released on a county road. One of the officers, older guy with the sergeant's stripes, seemed skeptical about some details, kept pressing on why I'd gone off the interstate in the first place, why I hadn't used my CB to call for help sooner. I explained about the mechanical failure in the reefer unit, about trying to save the load, about making decisions under stress that might not have been optimal in hindsight. He nodded, but didn't seem fully convinced, and I could see him making notes that probably flagged my story for further investigation. "We'll follow up," he said. "Check the area where you said you were held. See if we can find evidence or witnesses. In the meantime, you'll need to stay available for additional questions." They cleared me to leave, and I started the drive back to Phoenix with an empty trailer, my mind replaying every moment from the breakdown to the transfer to this parking lot conversation. I thought about Sybil's warning to keep it simple, about Albin's confidence that drivers always chose compliance over resistance, about the 19 others who'd apparently made the same choice I was making now. I wondered if any of them had tried to do more afterward, if any of them had given police enough information to actually investigate, or if they'd all just taken the path of least resistance. I made it to the Phoenix terminal around 3 a.m., parked my rig in the yard, and filled out the incident reports that my company required. By sunrise, I was in a manager's office explaining why I'd lost a $40,000 load of organic produce, why I'd deviated from approved routing, why my story had gaps that couldn't be easily verified. The manager was professional but clearly suspicious, asking the same questions the state police had asked, looking for inconsistencies or admissions that might indicate I was somehow involved in the theft. "The insurance company is going to investigate this thoroughly," he warned me. "They'll want to interview you, probably multiple times. They'll check your financials, look for any indication of collusion or staged theft. If this is legitimate, you'll be cleared and we'll move forward. If there's any hint you were involved, you'll be terminated and possibly face criminal charges." I assured him it was legitimate, that I was a victim, that I wanted whoever did this caught and prosecuted. He seemed to accept that, but made it clear I was on administrative leave until the investigation concluded. I drove home in a rental car the company provided, arrived at my apartment as the sun was fully up, and collapsed on my couch without bothering to change clothes. My phone kept buzzing with calls from the insurance investigator, from additional law enforcement agencies, from my union representative checking if I needed legal support. I ignored them all, too exhausted and too conflicted to engage with the machinery of investigation and bureaucracy. Over the next week, I gave 3 more statements to various investigators, walked through the timeline so many times I could recite it in my sleep, stuck to the basic story despite increasing pressure to provide more detail. The insurance company sent their own investigator, a former cop who specialized in cargo theft, and he spent 2 hours trying to poke holes in my account, looking for the inconsistencies that would justify denying the claim. I held firm, described the hijacking in the same vague terms I'd used from the start, and eventually he seemed to accept that either I was telling the truth or I was disciplined enough to maintain a lie under interrogation. What haunted me wasn't the investigation or the suspicion. It was the knowledge of what was really happening on that ranch property. The operation that had victimized at least 19 other drivers and would probably continue victimizing more. I thought about reporting the real story, about telling investigators about Sybil and Albin and the organized nature of the theft. But every time I considered it, I remembered Albin's photos, remembered the driver in the ravine, remembered Sybil's story about the missing driver who'd tried to be a hero, and I remembered something else, something Albin had said that stuck with me. He'd mentioned distributors who received the stolen loads, buyers who were part of the network, people who had interests in keeping the operation quiet. That suggested connections beyond just the theft crew, possibly involving legitimate businesses or individuals with resources and motivation to protect the operation. If I exposed them, would I be fighting just Sybil and Albin, or would I be taking on a larger network with the capability to reach me anywhere? 3 weeks after the incident, the insurance company approved the claim, paid out for the lost load, and my company reinstated me to active status. My manager told me I was cleared, that they believed my story, that I could resume normal operations. But he also suggested I might want to consider different routes, maybe avoid I-8 for a while, take assignments that kept me in more populated areas. It wasn't quite an admission that he knew there was more to the story, but it was acknowledgement that something dangerous was out there. I took his advice, started requesting routes that stayed on major interstates, that didn't venture into the isolated stretches where trouble could find you. Other drivers noticed the change, asked if I was getting cautious in my old age, made jokes about me being spooked by the hijacking. I laughed it off, didn't explain the real reason, didn't share what I knew about operations targeting truckers on lonely roads. Because to explain would be to admit I'd chosen silence over justice, chosen personal safety over protecting other drivers who might face the same situation. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through areas that remind me of that Arizona desert, I think about Sybil and Albin and wonder if they're still running their operation. I wonder if they've added to their count of 20 drivers, if someone else has been forced to make the same choice I made, if the missing driver ever turned up, or if he became another unsolved disappearance in the vast Southwest. And I wonder if any of those 19 others carry the same weight I do, the knowledge that we could have stopped it but chose not to, because the cost seemed too high. The high desert stretch of I-40 between Kingman and Seligman is one of those routes that looks deceptively simple on a map, but carries its own particular kind of loneliness once you're actually driving it. My name's Croy Ellinger, and I'd been running freight across the Southwest for close to 14 years, mostly dry goods and general cargo, the kind of loads that didn't require refrigeration but still had tight delivery windows. That night in late October, I was hauling a mixed load of warehouse overstock heading from a distribution center outside Flagstaff to a buyer in Henderson, Nevada. Standard stuff that should have been a straightforward overnight run. I'd left Flagstaff around 9 p.m., planning to take I-40 west to Kingman, then cut north on US 93 toward Vegas and Henderson. The load wasn't particularly valuable, maybe $30,000 worth of retail goods, liquidation merchandise from stores that had closed, nothing that would normally attract attention from thieves or hijackers. My rig was a 2017 Peterbilt 579, company truck with about 420,000 miles showing, well-maintained and reliable. The weather forecast had called for clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for night driving when the traffic was light and you could make good time. The first indication that something was off came about 40 miles west of Seligman, near one of those old Route 66 rest areas that the state still maintained, even though most traffic had moved to the newer facilities closer to Kingman. It was maybe 11:30 p.m., and I'd been making excellent time, running about 70 in a 65 zone like most truckers do when enforcement is light. I noticed a semi parked at the rest area as I passed, unusual because most drivers preferred the newer stops with better lighting and amenities, but not unheard of. What caught my attention was that the truck's hazard lights were on, and the driver's door was standing wide open, interior light glowing in the darkness. I debated whether to stop and check if the driver needed help, that old trucker code of looking out for each other on the road. But something about the scene felt wrong. The door too perfectly open, the lights too obviously displayed, like it was staged to get attention. I kept driving, made a mental note to call it in once I had better cell coverage, and watched my mirrors to see if the truck showed any other signs of activity. Nothing moved. No one appeared. Just that open door and the rhythmic flash of hazard lights getting smaller in my mirror. About 10 minutes later, maybe mile marker 103, I saw headlights appear behind me, coming up fast. In the high desert at night, you can see lights from a long way off, and these were closing distance at a rate that suggested the vehicle was doing at least 85 or 90. As it got closer, I could make out that it was a semi, dark-colored, no running lights that I could see except the headlights themselves. It pulled up behind me, maybe 200 feet back, then just sat there, matching my speed exactly. I checked my speedometer, confirmed I was doing 72, and the truck behind me maintained that same distance like we were connected by a tow bar. After a few minutes of this, I tried the CB radio, switching to channel 19. "Truck behind me at mile 105, you need to pass or you need something?" Static, no response, but I could see the truck was still there, still maintaining that precise following distance. I tried channel 9, the emergency frequency, same result, nothing but dead air. The truck followed me for another 15 miles, never varying its distance, never attempting to pass, just sitting in my mirrors like a shadow that had decided to take physical form. I tried speeding up to 78, and it matched me. I slowed to 65, and it slowed precisely the same amount. Whoever was driving had locked onto me for reasons I couldn't understand, and the persistence of it was starting to make my hands sweat on the wheel despite the cool night air coming through the vents. Then, around mile marker 119, the truck suddenly accelerated, closing the gap fast. I watched it come up on my driver's side like it was finally going to pass, but instead of pulling ahead, it matched my speed exactly and stayed parallel to me in the passing lane. I couldn't see the driver through the cab windows. They were either tinted or the interior was completely dark, but I could see it was a Kenworth conventional, probably a W900, dark blue or black paint, no company markings visible, no D8 numbers, nothing identifying. We drove like that for maybe 3 miles, side by side, and I was getting increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The truck was close enough that any deviation in either of our paths would result in contact, and at 70 miles per hour, that kind of collision would be catastrophic for both of us. I tried the CB again. "Kenworth in the passing lane, you need to complete your pass or drop back, you're in my blind spot." No response, the truck just maintained its position. Then it started drifting toward me, just slightly, maybe 6 inches, then another 6 inches, forcing me to ease toward the shoulder to maintain separation. I hit my horn, 3 long blasts that echoed across the empty desert, and the truck drifted back to center of its lane. But the message was clear. Whoever was driving could push me off the road any time they wanted, and they wanted me to know it. I was being played with, tested, or warned, I couldn't tell which. The Kenworth held a position for another mile, then suddenly accelerated and pulled ahead, getting maybe a quarter mile in front of me before its brake lights came on. It slowed dramatically, forcing me to slow down as well to avoid rear-ending it, dropping from 70 to 50 to 40, crawling along the interstate at a speed that was dangerous given the lack of visibility and the possibility of faster traffic coming up behind us. I put on my hazards, hoping anyone approaching from behind would see the warning and slow down, but there was no other traffic visible in either direction. Just me and this Kenworth playing some kind of dangerous game. After maintaining 40 miles per hour for maybe 5 minutes, the Kenworth suddenly swerved onto the shoulder, kicking up dust and gravel, and came to a complete stop. I passed it, accelerating back to normal speed, and watched in my mirrors as it sat there on the shoulder. Hazard lights now on, mimicking the abandoned truck I'd seen at the rest area. The parallel was too obvious to be coincidence, and I realized with growing dread that whoever was in that Kenworth might be connected to the abandoned truck, Might be part of some kind of operation that used distressed vehicles to lure drivers into stopping. I grabbed my phone, planning to call Highway Patrol, but I had no signal, which was typical for this stretch of I-40 where cellular coverage was spotty at best. The CB was still useless, no response on any channel, and I was starting to wonder if the Kenworth had some kind of jamming equipment, some way to block communications in the immediate area. I'd heard stories about sophisticated cargo thieves using military-grade tech, but I'd always figured those were trucker legends, exaggerations of more mundane crimes. The Kenworth's headlights came back on, and I watched it pull back onto the interstate, accelerating hard to catch up with me. This time it came up fast on my passenger side, and as it pulled even, I got my first clear look at the cab interior through my passenger window. There was someone in the driver's seat. I could see the silhouette, but something was wrong with the way they were positioned. Too still, too rigid, like a mannequin or a person who wasn't actually operating the vehicle. The thought that maybe the truck was being controlled remotely or by someone hidden lower in the cab sent a chill through me. The Kenworth stayed parallel for maybe 30 seconds, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it if the windows were open. Then it dropped back and disappeared from my mirrors entirely, just gone like it had never been there. I kept checking, expecting to see headlights reappear, but there was nothing behind me except empty highway stretching back into darkness. Either the truck had turned off somewhere without me noticing, which seemed unlikely given how closely I'd been watching, or it had killed its lights and was following in total darkness, which seemed impossible but also terrifying. I pushed my speed up to 75, trying to put distance between me and whatever had just been harassing me, and that's when I saw the next rest area sign, 2 miles ahead. This was the newer facility I'd been planning to skip, intending to push straight through to Kingman and fuel up there. But the thought of staying on this highway alone with a phantom Kenworth somewhere in the darkness made the rest area seem like a better option, somewhere with lights and hopefully other people, even if it was the middle of the night. As I approached the rest area, I could see it was nearly empty. Just one vehicle visible in the parking area. Looked like a passenger car, maybe a sedan, parked near the restroom building. There were lights on in the building itself, and I could see what appeared to be a maintenance or custodial vehicle parked near the side entrance. I took the exit, slowing for the loop, and pulled into the truck parking section, choosing a spot under the brightest light pole I could find. I sat there for a moment with the engine idling, checking all my mirrors, looking for any sign of the Kenworth. The highway behind me was empty. No headlights, no movement, just the usual desert night silence. I grabbed my phone, still no signal, which was frustrating but not surprising for this location. The restroom building was maybe 75 feet from my truck, well-lit pathway between them, and I could see someone moving inside through the windows, probably the custodian doing their rounds. I decided to make a quick run to the restroom, stretch my legs, maybe see if the custodian had a phone or radio I could use to report the harassment I'd experienced. I locked my cab, pocketed my keys, and started walking towards the building. The desert air was cold, probably down in the mid-50s, and perfectly still, no wind at all. My footsteps echoed on the concrete walkway, and I had that prickly feeling of being watched that made me keep checking over my shoulder. The restroom building was one of those modern designs with the facilities separated by a central corridor and a small custodial office at the far end. As I walked past the women's restroom entrance, I noticed something that made me slow down. There were wet footprints on the concrete, recent enough that they hadn't dried yet, leading from the women's restroom out toward the parking area. But the pattern was wrong. The footprints were going in both directions, in and out multiple times, and they were all the same size, same shoe tread, like one person had been pacing back and forth. I continued to the men's room, used the facilities quickly, the whole time feeling that same watched sensation, like Eyes were tracking me through the walls. When I came back out, the footprints were still there, still wet. But now there were more of them, extending further down the corridor toward the custodial office. I could hear sounds from that direction. Movement, maybe equipment being used, normal maintenance sounds. But my instincts were telling me to get back to my truck, to not investigate, to just leave this rest area and deal with the Kenworth situation somewhere else. I started walking back toward the exit, and that's when I heard the voice behind me. "Sir, excuse me, sir. Could you help me with something?" I turned, and there was a woman in a custodial uniform, maybe late 40s, carrying a mop and bucket, standing in the corridor I'd just left. She looked normal, professional, exactly what you'd expect for a rest area custodian. But something about her expression was off, too fixed, too intense, like she was concentrating very hard on appearing casual. "What do you need?" I asked, keeping my distance, hand in my pocket where my keys were, ready to run if necessary. She gestured toward the custodial office. "I've got a water leak in the storage area. Need someone to help me move some equipment so I can access the shutoff valve. Would only take a minute, and I'd really appreciate it. Been trying to handle it myself for the last hour." It was a reasonable request, the kind of thing most people would help with without thinking twice. But I'd just been harassed by a phantom truck for 30 miles. I was in an isolated rest area in the middle of the night, and this woman's wet footprints suggested she'd been doing something other than normal custodial work. "I'm not really equipped to help with plumbing," I said, "but I can call for assistance once I get cell signal back. There a phone in your office I could use?" Her expression changed, just slightly, disappointment or frustration flickering across her features before she reset to that fixed smile. "Phone lines are down, have been for a couple days. They're supposed to send someone to fix them, but you know how it is with state maintenance. Everything takes forever. I really just need a hand moving a shelving unit, maybe 2 minutes of work. Please, I'm desperate here. Water's getting into the electrical panel." The mention of electrical panels and the urgency in her voice might have convinced me if I hadn't spent the last hour being stalked by a truck that vanished into thin air. Instead, it made me more suspicious, more certain that this was part of whatever operation I'd stumbled into. "I'm sorry, I can't help," I said, backing toward the exit. "I need to get back on the road. I'm running behind schedule." I turned and walked quickly toward the exit, not quite running but moving with purpose. Behind me, I heard her voice again, no longer friendly, now flat and cold. "Mr. Ellinger, you should reconsider. It would be better for everyone if you just helped with the small task." She'd used my name, my actual name, which I hadn't given her. My CDL was in my wallet in my pocket. My truck had company logos on it. Maybe she'd seen those. But the way she said it, with complete certainty, suggested she'd known who I was before I ever walked into this building. I pushed through the exit doors and headed for my truck at a fast walk, almost a jog, keys already in my hand. I could hear the building doors open behind me, hear footsteps following, and I risked a glance back to see the woman in the custodial uniform walking after me, no longer carrying the mop and bucket, now holding something else, something dark that caught the light wrong, might have been a radio or might have been something more threatening. I reached my truck, got the door open, and climbed into the cab in one motion, hitting the locks as soon as I was inside. The woman, her name tag said Letha Moreland, had stopped maybe 20 feet from my truck, just standing there watching me with that same fixed expression. I started the engine, put it in gear, and started to roll forward. That's when I saw the headlights at the rest area entrance, a semi-truck pulling in, and even in the darkness, I could tell it was the Kenworth, the one that had been stalking me. The Kenworth pulled into the rest area with deliberate slowness, positioning itself to block the main exit back to the interstate. I watched it in my mirrors, calculating angles and distances, trying to figure out if I had enough space to maneuver around it or if I was effectively trapped in this parking lot. Letha Moreland was still standing there, and now she'd pulled out what I could clearly see was a radio, speaking into it while watching my truck. The coordination was obvious. She was communicating with whoever was driving the Kenworth, working together to box me in. I had maybe 30 seconds before the Kenworth completed its blocking maneuver, and I used that time to scan for alternative routes out of the rest area. There was a service road on the east side of the parking lot, probably used by maintenance vehicles. Looked like it might connect to the frontage road that ran parallel to the interstate. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a semi, and I had no idea if it was even passable or if it dead-ended somewhere in the desert. But it was the only option that didn't involve trying to squeeze past the Kenworth or waiting to see what Letha and her partner had planned. I cranked the wheel hard right and accelerated toward the service road, my trailer swinging wide, clearing the concrete barriers by inches. In my mirror, I saw Letha start running toward her custodial vehicle, and the Kenworth's engine revved as the driver realized what I was attempting. The service road surface was rough, cracked asphalt with sections of exposed gravel, and my rig bounced violently as I pushed my speed up to maybe 40 miles per hour. Faster than was safe but necessary to maintain the gap. The road curved behind the rest area facilities, past dumpsters and storage sheds, then started descending slightly toward what looked like a wash or drainage channel. I could see the frontage road beyond it, parallel to I-40, maybe 100 yards away. The problem was the crossing between where I was and where I needed to be. It looked like an old concrete ford, the kind built for occasional water flow, and I had no idea if it would support a loaded semi or if the approach angles would high-center my trailer. Behind me, headlights appeared. The Kenworth had found the service road and was following, closing distance because it was lighter and more maneuverable than my fully loaded rig. I could also see Letha's custodial vehicle, a white pickup truck with state markings, joining the pursuit. They were coordinated, professional. Clearly not the first time they'd chased someone through this area. I hit the concrete ford doing maybe 35. Felt the whole rig lurch as the front axle dropped into the depression, then the drives, then the trailer tandems, each impact jarring and violent. The trailer scraped bottom. I heard metal grinding against concrete, but momentum carried me through and up the other side. I was on the frontage road now, paved but narrow, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. I turned west toward Kingman, paralleling the interstate that was maybe 50 yards to my left, separated by a fence and an embankment. My speed was back up to 50, pushing 55, and I was checking mirrors constantly, watching the Kenworth navigate the same ford I'd just crossed. It made it through, as did Letha's pickup, and now they were both on the frontage road behind me. The Kenworth maybe 200 yards back, the pickup closer, probably doing 65 and closing fast. The frontage road stretched ahead into darkness, no streetlights, no signs indicating where it led or if it eventually reconnected with the interstate. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank, enough for hours of driving if it came to that, but I needed to find a way back to civilization, to other vehicles and witnesses and safety. The pickup was alongside me now, Letha driving, and I could see her gesturing, pointing toward the shoulder, clearly wanting me to pull over. I ignored her, kept my eyes on the road ahead, and that's when she did something that made my blood go cold. She swerved her pickup truck directly into my path, forcing me to brake hard to avoid collision. My air brakes screamed. The trailer started to slide, and I had to fight the wheel to keep from jackknifing on the narrow road. I managed to slow without losing control, but the pickup had gained position ahead of me, and now it was brake-checking me, slowing suddenly, forcing me to slow with it, the Kenworth catching up from behind. They were boxing me in again, using the same tactic I'd seen on the interstate, controlling my speed and position. We were doing maybe 25 miles per hour now, crawling along the frontage road, and I was running out of options fast. That's when I saw lights ahead. Not vehicle lights, but stationary ones looked like it might be a way station or inspection point, some kind of official facility on the frontage road. As we got closer, I could make out more details. It was definitely a commercial vehicle inspection station, one of those smaller outposts that Arizona DPS used for random safety checks. There was a vehicle parked in the lot, looked like an official truck, and I could see lights on in the small office building. Letha saw it too, and her brake checking became more aggressive, trying to force me to stop before I reached the inspection station. But I had momentum and weight on my side, and I wasn't stopping for anything short of a collision. I laid on my horn 5 long blasts that echoed across the desert, and accelerated past the pickup, pushing my speed back up despite the risk. The inspection station was maybe a quarter mile ahead, and I aimed straight for it. The Kenworth behind me suddenly accelerated as well, like the driver had decided to make a move before I reached help. It came up fast on my driver's side, attempting to pull alongside, and I could see the cab more clearly now in the ambient light from the inspection station ahead. The driver was visible this time, a figure hunched over the wheel, but still something wrong about the posture, about the way the head was angled. The Kenworth started drifting toward me again, that same aggressive move from before, trying to push me off the road or force me to stop. I had maybe 15 seconds before I'd reach the inspection station, and I used my size advantage, held my line firmly, forcing the Kenworth to either back off or risk a collision that would damage both vehicles. The driver chose to back off, dropping behind me, and I swept into the inspection station lot with my horn still blaring, my hazard lights flashing, my high beams on, making as much noise and light as possible to get attention. The office door opened immediately, and a figure emerged, a man in what looked like an Arizona DPS uniform, probably a commercial vehicle inspector working a night shift. I pulled to a stop in the middle of the lot, positioned so I could see all approaches, and watched as both the Kenworth and Letha's pickup slowed dramatically, then turned off the frontage road onto a side track, disappearing into the desert darkness without ever entering the inspection station property. The DPS inspector walked toward my truck, hand resting on his duty belt, clearly aware that something unusual was happening. I rolled down my window as he approached, and he called up, "Everything all right, driver?" That was quite an entrance. His voice was professional but concerned, and I could see his eyes scanning my truck, probably looking for signs of distress or damage. "I need to report a pursuit situation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. "I've been followed and harassed since mile marker 105, 2 vehicles working together, a Kenworth semi and a state custodial pickup truck. They tried to force me off the road multiple times, chased me through the rest area and down the frontage road." The inspector's expression shifted from concern to something more serious, and he pulled out a radio from his belt. "Stay in your vehicle. I'm calling this in to Highway Patrol." He stepped back, spoke into his radio in low tones I couldn't quite hear, then returned to my window. "I'm Inspector Treadwell, Bram Treadwell, Commercial Enforcement Division. I need you to shut down your engine and step out of the vehicle. We're going to secure the scene and get some additional units here." I complied, killing the engine and climbing down from the cab. Treadwell positioned himself where he could watch both me and the surrounding area, clearly taking the threat seriously. "You said a custodial vehicle. From which rest area?" I described the location, the newer facility about 10 miles back, and mentioned Letha Moreland by name from her tag. His expression darkened further. "That facility's been closed for maintenance for the past 2 weeks. There shouldn't be any custodial staff there at all." That information hit me like a physical blow. The rest area was closed, which meant Letha wasn't a legitimate employee, She was using the uniform and the facility as cover for whatever operation they were running. She knew my name, I said. Called me by name even though I'd never identified myself. Treadwell pulled out a notepad. "What's your name, driver?" I told him, showed him my CDL and my vehicle registration, and he wrote it down, comparing the information to something on his phone. "Mr. Ellinger, I'm going to need you to give me a detailed statement about everything that happened tonight, starting from when you first noticed the Kenworth. But first, I want to check your load, verify what you're hauling." He walked toward my trailer, and I followed, explaining about the mixed load of warehouse overstock, showing him my bill of lading and manifest. He examined the documents carefully, then inspected the seal on my trailer doors. "Seal's intact, that's good. You said they never attempted to access your cargo?" I confirmed they hadn't, which seemed to puzzle him. "So they followed you, harassed you, tried to force you to stop, but never made any direct attempt at theft?" I nodded, and he made notes, his expression thoughtful. "That's not typical hijacker behavior. Usually they want the cargo, or they want the truck itself. This sounds more like they were trying to isolate you, get you to a specific location for a specific purpose that wasn't simple theft." The implication of what he was suggesting made my skin crawl. "You think they were trying to, what, kidnap me? Why?" Treadwell didn't answer directly, just kept making notes. "We've had reports over the past few months. Drivers who claimed they were followed or harassed on this stretch of I-40, but most of those reports were vague, hard to verify. No one's reported an actual pursuit like what you're describing, and no one's mentioned the rest area or custodial staff being involved." Headlights appeared on the frontage road, coming from the direction of the interstate, and Treadwell's hand went to his sidearm before he recognized it as a marked Arizona Highway Patrol unit. The cruiser pulled into the inspection station, and 2 troopers got out, conferring briefly with Treadwell before approaching me. The senior trooper, a woman with sergeant stripes, introduced herself and asked me to walk through the entire sequence of events again. I spent the next 45 minutes giving statements, describing the Kenworth, describing Letha Moreland, describing the pursuit down the frontage road. The troopers took photos of my truck, documented some minor damage to my undercarriage from the concrete ford crossing, and called for additional units to check the rest area and search for the Kenworth and the pickup truck. Treadwell stayed with me the whole time, asking detailed questions about the Kenworth's behavior, about how it had matched my movements, about the apparent coordination between the vehicles. "The way you're describing it," he said at one point, "sounds almost like they were testing you, seeing how you'd react to different types of pressure. The parallel driving, the brake checking, the blocking maneuvers, those are all tactics used in vehicle interdiction training, the kind of stuff law enforcement or military personnel would know." That was a disturbing thought, that whoever was driving the Kenworth might have professional training in pursuit and vehicle control. One of the troopers came back from checking the rest area, reported that it was indeed closed and locked, no sign of recent activity, no custodial vehicle present. They'd found the service road I'd described and the concrete ford crossing, confirmed there were fresh tire tracks consistent with my story, but no sign of the pursuing vehicles. "They disappeared," the trooper said. "Could be dozens of side roads and ranch tracks in this area where they could have gone to ground." Treadwell asked if I was willing to go back to the rest area, show them exactly what had happened, where I'd encountered Letha Moreland. I agreed, despite not wanting to return to that place, and we formed a convoy, my truck following the highway patrol units back down the frontage road. The inspection station receded in my mirrors, and I felt exposed again, vulnerable, even with law enforcement escort. The rest area looked different with multiple patrol vehicles lighting it up, their LED bars turning everything harsh blue and white. I showed them where I'd parked, where I'd encountered Letha near the restroom building, the corridor where she'd asked for help. Treadwell examined the area carefully, found the wet footprints I'd described, though they were mostly dry now. "These prints," he said, photographing them, "they're all the same tread pattern, same size, like you said. Someone was pacing or staging this scene. We checked the custodial office, found it locked, and Treadwell used a facility master key to open it. Inside was standard maintenance equipment, cleaning supplies, nothing unusual or suspicious at first glance. But then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a clipboard with papers attached. 'Incident log,' he said, reading. 'Lists of trucks that have stopped here over the past 6 months, makes, models, company names, some with license plate numbers.' He flipped through the pages. 'Your truck isn't on here, Mr. Ellinger,' which means they weren't monitoring this facility for random targets. They were tracking specific vehicles or following specific drivers. That suggested premeditation, that I'd been selected as a target before I ever reached the rest area, possibly before I'd even left Flagstaff. How would they know I'd be on this route tonight? I asked. Treadwell considered the question. Shipping manifests sometimes get leaked or hacked. Dispatch communications can be monitored if someone has the right equipment. Or it could be simpler than that. Someone at your company or at the shipper could be providing information to these people. The thought that there might be an inside connection made the situation even more disturbing. What do I do now? I asked. I still need to deliver this load to Henderson, but I don't want to be alone on the highway if these people are still out there looking for me. The highway patrol sergeant who'd been coordinating the response came over. We're going to provide escort to the Nevada state line. Make sure you get out of Arizona safely. Once you're in Nevada, we'll hand off to NHP, have them escort you the rest of the way to Henderson. It was more protection than I'd expected, and I felt some of the tension ease. But Treadwell had more questions, wanted to know about my cargo in detail, about the shipper in Flagstaff, about the buyer in Henderson. This warehouse overstock, he said. Any chance it's covering for something else? Something valuable enough that people would go to these lengths to intercept it? I insisted it was exactly what the manifest stated, just liquidation merchandise, retail goods, nothing special. He seemed to accept that, but made a note to follow up with both the shipper and receiver. Mr. Ellinger, I'm going to recommend you don't run this route again for the foreseeable future. Whatever their goal was tonight, they invested significant resources in trying to achieve it. They had at least 2 vehicles, coordination, knowledge of your route, probably surveillance. That level of organization suggests they'll try again if they think they can succeed. The highway patrol sergeant organized the escort. 2 patrol units, one ahead of me and one behind, and we rolled out of the rest area in convoy formation. Back on I-40, heading west toward Kingman, I felt somewhat safer but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every set of headlights in my mirrors looked potentially threatening. Every vehicle on the highway a possible pursuer. The patrol units maintained their positions, and we made it to Kingman without incident. Stopped at a truck stop for fuel and a brief break. While I was fueling, Treadwell pulled up in his inspection vehicle, got out and walked over. Got some information from our intelligence unit, he said. That Kenworth you described. We've had 3 reports of a similar vehicle in the past 2 months, all on I-40 or Route 66, all involving harassment of commercial drivers. None of the previous incidents escalated to actual pursuit like yours did, but the pattern's there. Dark Kenworth, no markings, aggressive driving, attempts to force drivers off the road or make them stop. What happened in those other cases? I asked. He checked his notes. 2 drivers reported it, gave statements, but we never found the truck. One driver didn't report it officially, just mentioned it in a conversation with another trucker who passed the information along. Could be more incidents that went unreported, drivers who didn't think it was worth calling in or who were afraid of retaliation. The Nevada state line was another 40 minutes west, and the Arizona units would hand me off there to NHP escorts who'd take me the rest of the way to Henderson. As we rolled back onto I-40, I noticed Treadwell was staying with the convoy, apparently planning to follow all the way to the state line. The highway stretched ahead, mostly empty at this hour. Just the occasional westbound truck or eastbound passenger vehicle. That's when I saw it in my mirror, maybe a mile back. A semi-truck with no running lights visible except headlights, pulling onto I-40 from what must have been a side road or rest area. Even at this distance, even with the distortion of mirror view, I recognized the configuration, the dark color barely visible against the night sky. The Kenworth was back, and it was following us. I grabbed my CB radio, keyed the mic. "Inspector Treadwell, we've got company. Dark Kenworth just pulled onto I-40 about a mile back. No running lights, same truck from earlier." There was a pause. Then Treadwell's voice came through, calm but alert. "I see it. Highway patrol units are aware. Maintain your speed, stay in formation. We're going to see what this driver does." The two patrol units adjusted their positions slightly, the lead car dropping back to ride alongside my trailer, the rear car accelerating to get between me and the Kenworth. The Kenworth closed distance steadily, not racing but moving with deliberate purpose, and as it got within maybe a quarter mile, the rear patrol unit lit up its full light bar and siren, the classic pullover signal. But the Kenworth didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the emergency lights, just kept coming at the same steady pace. I watched in my mirrors as the patrol car dropped back further, positioning itself directly behind the Kenworth, matching its speed, lights still blazing. Treadwell's voice came over the CB again. "Croy, that driver's not responding to law enforcement signals. This has escalated to a felony pursuit situation. We're going to try to execute a traffic stop, but I need you to stay calm and maintain your course. Do not attempt to intervene or take any action. Just drive steady." I acknowledged, my hands tight on the wheel, watching the drama unfold behind me through my mirrors. The patrol car behind the Kenworth tried to close distance, probably attempting to get a visual on the license plate or the driver, but the Kenworth suddenly accelerated, closing the gap to my truck rapidly. The rear patrol car matched the acceleration, and now we had a high-speed situation developing, speeds climbing toward 80 miles per hour. The lead patrol car, still alongside me, signaled for me to slow down, and I started easing off the throttle, dropping from 70 to 65 to 60. The Kenworth came up fast on my driver's side, the patrol car right on its bumper, and for a moment, all three vehicles were in a line alongside my truck. I could see the Kenworth's cab clearly now under the patrol car's spotlight, could see the driver, and what I saw made no sense. The person behind the wheel was slumped forward, head down, arms extended to the wheel but not moving, like they were unconscious or worse. The truck was driving itself, somehow maintaining speed and direction without active input. Treadwell must have seen it too because his voice came over the radio, sharp with alarm. "All units, that driver appears incapacitated. Vehicle may be on some kind of autopilot or cruise control system. Attempting to make contact." The rear patrol car pulled alongside the Kenworth's passenger side, and I could see the trooper gesturing, trying to get a response from the driver, but there was no reaction, no movement from the figure slumped at the wheel. The Kenworth started drifting toward me again, that same aggressive move from before, except this time there was clearly no one actively controlling it. The patrol car on the passenger side tried to pace it, keep it in its lane, but the drift continued, slow but inexorable. I had maybe 3 seconds before it would make contact with my trailer, and I was already on the shoulder with nowhere else to go. The lead patrol car, seeing the situation, accelerated ahead and then cut sharply in front of the Kenworth, attempting a blocking maneuver. The Kenworth's automated system, whatever it was, reacted to the obstacle by braking hard and sudden. I heard the squeal of locked tires, saw the truck start to veer, and then it was sliding sideways across both lanes. The patrol car that had been on its passenger side had to swerve violently to avoid being hit, and the rear patrol car barely managed to brake in time. The Kenworth completed a full 180-degree spin and came to rest facing the wrong way on the interstate. Smoke pouring from its locked tires, but somehow still upright. I'd slowed to maybe 30 miles per hour during this, and now I came to a complete stop about 200 yards ahead of the Kenworth, watching in my mirrors as the patrol units surrounded it. Officers exiting with weapons drawn, approaching the cab with tactical caution. Treadwell pulled up alongside my truck, rolled down his window. "Stay in your vehicle, Croy. We don't know what we're dealing with here." I nodded, not trusting my voice, hands still gripping the wheel even though I was stopped. Through my mirrors, I watched the troopers approach the Kenworth's driver's door, saw one of them pull it open, saw them react with what looked like shock or alarm. They immediately called for medical assistance, and one trooper started performing what appeared to be CPR on the figure they'd pulled from the cab. Treadwell left his vehicle and walked back toward the scene, his hand on his sidearm, moving with careful deliberation. He was gone for maybe 10 minutes, and when he came back to my truck, his expression was grim. "The driver's dead, Croy. Has been for hours, probably since before this truck was following you. Medical examiner will have to confirm, but it looks like natural causes, maybe a heart attack or stroke." The implications of that statement took a moment to process. But the truck was driving, was following me, was making decisions, I said. "How is that possible if the driver was dead?" Treadwell pulled out his phone, showed me a photo he'd taken. It was the Kenworth's dashboard, and mounted on it was an array of electronic equipment I didn't recognize, screens and control units, cables running everywhere. "Autonomous driving system," he said. "Military grade, the kind used in experimental convoy operations. Someone installed it in that truck and programmed it to follow specific targets, react to specific situations. The driver probably died while it was engaged, and the system just kept operating according to its programming." That was horrifying on multiple levels. So, all night, I was being chased by a dead man's truck running on autopilot? Treadwell nodded slowly. And that system was sophisticated enough to make tactical decisions, to coordinate with other vehicles, to respond to your movements. This isn't some garage-built setup, this is professional-grade technology, probably cost 6 figures to install and program. Someone invested serious resources into making that truck into an autonomous pursuit vehicle. Who would do that? And why target me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answers. Treadwell looked back at the Kenworth, surrounded now by emergency vehicles and investigation units. "That's what we need to figure out. But Croy, whoever set this up, they're still out there. The driver didn't install this system himself, someone else did. Someone who knew your route, who programmed that truck to intercept you. And there's still the question of Letha Moreland and her role in all this." Highway Patrol had already put out alerts for the pickup truck Letha had been driving, and they were reviewing security footage from the rest area and surrounding highways, trying to track her movements. But Treadwell was honest about their chances. "She's probably already changed vehicles, changed appearance, gone to ground somewhere. These people, whoever they are, they plan carefully, have contingencies, don't leave easy trails to follow." A Nevada Highway Patrol unit arrived to take over the escort duty, and after another hour of giving statements and answering questions, I was cleared to continue to Henderson. Treadwell told me they'd be in touch, that the investigation was just beginning, that I should expect more interviews and probably federal involvement given the technology that had been found. "You did everything right tonight," he said. "Stayed calm, made good decisions, got yourself to safety. A lot of drivers wouldn't have survived what you went through." I wasn't sure survival was the right word for what I'd experienced. I'd made it through physically intact, but the knowledge of what had been chasing me, a dead man's truck running on programmed instructions to hunt me down, that was going to stay with me. The Nevada escort took me the rest of the way to Henderson, stayed with me while I unloaded at the distribution center, made sure I got to a hotel safely. But even in the hotel room with the door locked and the deadbolt engaged, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being tracked. The investigation dragged on for weeks. They identified the dead driver as a long-haul trucker named Marcus Delway, who'd been reported missing 3 days before my incident. His truck had been stolen from a rest area near Flagstaff, and evidence suggested he'd been forced to drive it while someone installed the autonomous system, then suffered a fatal cardiac event, possibly induced by stress or by something else. Toxicology was inconclusive. The system itself was traced to a defense contractor that reported several units stolen from a warehouse 6 months earlier. But they never found Letha Moreland, or whoever she really was. The custodial uniform was a rental, the name tag was fake, the pickup truck was found abandoned near the California border. Security footage from various locations showed her meeting with at least 2 other individuals, but facial recognition came back with no matches, suggesting false identities or people who'd never been in the system. The investigation eventually went cold, classified as an unsolved case with suspected ties to organized crime or corporate espionage. What bothered me most was never finding out why I was targeted. My cargo was exactly what the manifest said: warehouse overstock. Nothing valuable, nothing worth the resources they'd invested. The shipper in Flagstaff was clean, the receiver in Henderson was legitimate. My company had no connection to anything suspicious. I was just a driver on a routine haul who somehow became the focus of an elaborate operation that made no sense. Treadwell had a theory he shared with me off the record, months after the incident. "Maybe you weren't the target," he said. "Maybe you were the test case. They wanted to see if the autonomous pursuit system worked, if they could coordinate it with human operators, if they could isolate a driver effectively. You survived, so the test failed, but they gathered data, learned from the mistakes, refined the system for next time." The thought that I'd been nothing more than a guinea pig in someone's experiment was somehow worse than being targeted for my cargo. I still drive, but I avoid I-40 between Kingman and Seligman, take the longer route through Vegas even though it adds time and fuel costs. Other drivers tell me they've heard stories about that stretch, about trucks that follow too closely, about rest areas where the custodial staff ask for help with problems that don't exist, about vehicles that seem to drive themselves. Most dismiss it as trucker legends, ghost stories to pass the time on long hauls, but I know different. Every time I see a dark Kenworth on the highway, my pulse quickens just slightly, and I find myself checking if it has proper markings, if it's maintaining normal following distance, if the driver looks alive and alert. Most times it's just a regular truck driven by a regular driver making a living like I am. But there's always that moment of uncertainty, that flash of memory from the night I was hunted by a dead man's truck, programmed to run me down. The technology exists, that's not in question. The autonomous system they found was real, functional, sophisticated enough to make tactical decisions. What's unknown is how many others are out there, how many trucks have been converted into remotely controlled or fully autonomous pursuit vehicles, how many drivers have been targeted and maybe didn't make it to tell the story. The authorities claim they've shut down the operation, arrested some low-level operators, seized equipment. But Treadwell told me privately they only scratched the surface, that the people with the real knowledge and resources disappeared before they could be identified. Sometimes I think about Marcus Delway, the driver whose truck was used to chase me, who died while his vehicle continued its programmed mission. Did he know what was happening to him? Did he understand that his truck was being turned into a weapon? Or did the cardiac event take him before he could comprehend the horror of what they'd done? The medical examiner found evidence of prolonged stress, elevated cortisol levels, signs that he'd been under severe psychological pressure before his death. He was a victim too, just like I almost was. And Letha Moreland, or whoever she really was, is still out there. Treadwell showed me enhanced security footage from the rest area, and in some frames you could see her looking directly at cameras, almost like she wanted to be recorded, wanted us to know she could operate in plain sight and disappear without consequence. Her face, her mannerisms, everything about her was calculated, performed, the role of a helpful custodian played by someone with training in manipulation and deception. The most disturbing part came months later when another driver contacted me through a trucker forum, said he'd had a similar experience on a different highway, different state, but the same pattern, followed by an aggressive truck, encounter with someone in an official-looking uniform who knew details they shouldn't, pursuit that ended only when he reached other people. He'd reported it, was told it was being investigated, but nothing came of it. He wanted to know if I thought there was a connection, if maybe we were dealing with something bigger than isolated incidents. I didn't know how to answer him. Part of me wanted to say it was all coincidence, separate events with surface similarities but no real connection. But the other part, the part that had been hunted across the Arizona desert, that had looked into Letha Moreland's cold eyes and heard the dead man's truck roaring behind me, that part knew better. These weren't random crimes. These were tests or operations or experiments, pieces of something larger that we couldn't see. The last time I spoke with Treadwell, he mentioned that DPS was working with federal agencies to monitor for similar incidents, to identify patterns, to hopefully prevent future occurrences. But he also admitted they were reactive, not proactive, waiting for drivers to report problems rather than actively hunting the people responsible. We're outgunned, he said. They have technology we can barely understand, resources we can't match, and the ability to disappear whenever we get close. All we can do is document, investigate, and hope we eventually get lucky. I drive different routes now, vary my schedule, never announce my plans in advance, take random rest stops instead of the usual ones. Some drivers think I'm paranoid, that I'm letting one bad experience control my life. But they didn't see what I saw, didn't feel what I felt that night on I-40. They don't wake up at 3 a.m. in hotel rooms, checking the parking lot for dark Kenworths, wondering if tonight's the night the system finds them again. Because that's what haunts me most. The realization that I might not have been chosen for any particular reason, that I might have just been in the wrong place when they needed a test subject. Which means it could happen to anyone, any driver, any night, on any lonely stretch of highway where the desert swallows sound and the darkness hides intent. The autonomous truck is out there somewhere, or others like it, waiting for the next target, the next test, the next hunt. And somewhere, Letha Moreland is watching, coordinating, setting up the next operation. She knows my face, knows my name, probably knows my routes even now despite my precautions. I'm not actively being pursued anymore, but I'm not free either. I'm data in their system, a test case they can reference, a driver who survived when maybe I wasn't supposed to. That makes me either a loose end or proof of concept, and I'm not sure which is worse.